This is it, Mom. I'm really going, Zoe Jackson whispered, clutching her newly issued passport as her fingers traced the embossed golden eagle on its cover. The dark blue booklet represented everything she'd worked for, her ticket to the future. Standing in her bedroom, surrounded by an explosion of clothes, books, and carefully selected tech gadgets, Zoe could hardly believe that tomorrow she'd be flying across the Atlantic. At 17, she had already accomplished what many adults never would: acceptance into the prestigious Cambridge University Summer Institute for Future Engineers. The program accepted only 20 students worldwide each year, and she was one of them. Her acceptance hadn't been luck. It had been the culmination of years spent in high school robotics competitions, coding marathons that stretched into dawn, and aerospace projects that transformed her bedroom into a miniature NASA lab. Her GPA was perfect. Her recommendation letters glowed with praise. Zoe caught her reflection in the mirror as she adjusted her box braids, tying them back with a scrunchie. The face that looked back at her, warm brown skin, determined eyes, and the subtle tension in her jaw that appeared whenever she faced a challenge, was a blend of her mother's features and her own emerging identity. She had her mother's focus, her analytical mind, but there was something else there too, a quiet vulnerability she rarely showed to others. First international flight, she murmured to herself, checking off items on her color-coded spreadsheet. First time in Europe, first time traveling alone. That last part sent a flutter of anxiety through her stomach. She had grown up in Silver Spring, Maryland, a suburb just outside of Washington, D.C., close enough to the capital to visit museums on weekends, but far enough to feel like its own small community. Her world had been comfortable but limited. Now it was expanding dramatically. On her desk sat a framed photo of her and her mother at her science fair victory last year. Dr. Diana Jackson beamed with pride next to Zoe's project on advanced propulsion systems. Her mother, brilliant, driven, accomplished, had always been her role model. As Deputy Director for Air Traffic Safety Oversight at the Federal Aviation Administration, Dr. Jackson navigated the male-dominated world of aviation regulation with grace and authority that Zoe hoped to emulate in her own career. "You're going to change the world someday," her mother always said, and Zoe believed her, even if the weight of that expectation sometimes kept her awake at night. Outside her window, the suburban street was quiet in the summer evening light. Tomorrow, she would trade this familiar view for the ancient spires of Cambridge. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Her phone pinged with a notification: "Check in for Atlantic Global Airlines Flight 815 now available." With a deep breath, Zoe clicked the link. This was really happening. Her future waited 3,663 miles away, and in less than 24 hours, she would begin crossing that distance. A young black woman stepping confidently into spaces where people who looked like her were still too rarely seen. Dr. Diana Jackson balanced three things in her hands as she moved through her kitchen with practiced efficiency, her ever-present travel mug of black coffee, her government-issued phone displaying an urgent email from the Secretary of Transportation, and a spatula flipping perfectly golden pancakes for her daughter's last breakfast at home before her big trip. At 45, Diana Jackson had mastered the art of multitasking. She had to, as a single mother and the highest-ranking black woman in FAA history. Her life demanded nothing less than excellence in multiple arenas simultaneously. "Zoe, breakfast in 5 minutes." She called up the stairs, her voice carrying the warm authority that made airline CEOs and air traffic controllers alike snap to attention when she entered a room. The kitchen counter was covered with documents, flight regulations she needed to review, safety protocols requiring her signature, and nestled between them, Zoe's travel documents that Diana had organized with the same precision she applied to federal aviation directives. Diana checked her watch, a sleek professional timepiece that had been a gift from her team when she was promoted to Deputy Director for Air Traffic Safety Oversight 3 years ago. The position placed her among the elite federal officials responsible for the safety of America's skies, a role she approached with unwavering dedication. "Morning, Mom," Zoe said, entering the kitchen with her hair neatly braided and already dressed in her travel outfit, practical but stylish, just as Diana had taught her. Diana set down her phone and smiled at her daughter, momentarily setting aside the concerns of national air traffic systems to simply be a mom. Behind that smile, however, was a familiar worry. As a black woman who had navigated predominantly white spaces her entire career, Diana knew all too well the challenges Zoe might face traveling alone. Perfect timing. Sit down before these get cold. As they ate, Diana studied her daughter's face. She saw in it echoes of her own determination, but also the features of Zoe's father, who had died in a car accident when Zoe was just 3. Diana had raised their daughter alone, building her career while creating a stable, loving home filled with books, science, and unwavering support. "You have everything packed according to your list?" Diana asked. Though she knew the answer, Zoe's organizational skills rivaled her own. "Triple-checked last night," Zoe confirmed, pouring maple syrup with careful precision. "And I've memorized all the emergency contacts and procedures you quizzed me on." Diana nodded, taking a sip of coffee. A memory flashed, her own first international trip as a young engineer, and the subtle humiliations she'd endured at customs, the additional questions, the lingering scrutiny of her documents, the implicit suggestion that she didn't quite belong. "If anyone gives you trouble," Diana began, then stopped herself. She didn't want to burden Zoe with her own experiences, didn't want to plant seeds of anxiety where there was healthy excitement. "Mom," Zoe rolled her eyes with affectionate exasperation, "I've got it all in my phone, in my notebook. And yes, memorized. I'll be fine." Diana reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. "I know you will. She paused, searching for the right words. "I'm so proud of you, Zoe. This program is going to open doors you can't even imagine." And what Diana didn't say was how hard she had fought to make sure those doors would open for her daughter. How many rooms she had entered as the only Black woman present. How many battles she had won to ensure that Zoe would have opportunities she herself had to claw her way toward. Instead, she simply smiled and said, "The world is big, Zoe. Go see it. Go change it." John F. Kennedy International Airport hummed with the controlled chaos that defined modern air travel. Terminal 4 stretched before Zoe like a vast, gleaming cathedral to human movement, a sprawling complex of gates, shops, and rushing humanity under soaring ceilings and massive windows that framed taxiing aircraft. Zoe wheeled her carefully packed carry-on through the terminal, her backpack snug against her shoulders. The air carried a unique blend of jet fuel, overpriced coffee, and the subtle scent of collective anxiety. Her mother had dropped her off at the departures level with a tight hug and firm instructions. "Text me when you're through security, at the gate, and before boarding. I love you." Now, having navigated the TSA checkpoint with the practiced ease her mother had instilled in her through years of domestic travel, Zoe checked her boarding pass on her phone. Atlantic Global Airlines Flight 815 to London Heathrow, Gate B42. Boarding would begin in just over an hour. The international terminal buzzed with dozens of languages. A group of German tourists consulted a map nearby. A family spoke rapid-fire Hindi as children darted between luggage. Business travelers in sharp suits strode purposefully, their attention fixed on phones and tablets, navigating the terminal without looking up, like salmon instinctively finding their way upstream. Zoe took it all in with wide eyes, feeling the subtle shift in how people perceived her in this space. The quick glances, the slight adjustments in trajectory as people moved around her. She was used to being one of the few Black students in her advanced placement classes, but here the feeling of being observed was heightened, more palpable. She passed duty-free shops selling perfume and liquor, newsstands with magazines in multiple languages, and overpriced cafes where bleary-eyed travelers nursed coffees and checked watches. The mingled sense of coffee, disinfectant, and the indefinable smell of mass human transit filled the air. Overhead, announcements echoed in a constant stream. Final boarding for Atlantic Global Flight 772 to Paris at Gate B36. Passenger Chen, please report to Gate C15. Security level remains at orange. Following the signs toward her gate, Zoe felt a flutter of excitement and nervousness in her stomach. She had never flown internationally before, never crossed an ocean, never needed her passport until today. The weight of it in her crossbody bag felt significant, a tangible symbol of her expanding horizons. She passed Gate B38, then B40, each one a hive of activity, some boarding, some disembarking, others in the lull between flights. At each gate, she observed the airline staff, the way they processed passengers with varying degrees of efficiency and courtesy. As Gate B42 came into view, Zoe checked the large monitor. Atlantic Global Airlines Flight 815. London Heathrow. On time. Boarding 1:15 p.m. She had plenty of time. Finding an empty seat near the charging station, Zoe settled in, plugged in her phone, and sent her mother the promised text. At gate B42. All good so far? Love you? She glanced toward the gate podium where two Atlantic Global agents were preparing for boarding. One was a Hispanic man who looked to be in his 20s, arranging boarding passes and checking his computer. The other, an older white woman with streaked blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, seemed to be in charge. Her movements crisp and authoritative as she organized the gate area. As Zoe observed the woman's interactions with other staff members, she couldn't help but notice how her demeanor shifted depending on who she was speaking to. Warm and collegial with some, curt and dismissive with others. Zoe felt a familiar tightness in her chest. A sixth sense developed over years of navigating spaces where her presence was sometimes seen as an exception rather than a rule. Karen Miller had worked for Atlantic Global Airlines for 23 years, and in that time, she had developed what she considered an infallible sixth sense about passengers. She could spot trouble before it reached her gate, the oversized carry-on that would need checking, the intoxicated traveler who might cause problems mid-flight, the confused elderly passenger who would need extra assistance. But Karen's sixth sense carried with it something darker. Biases that had calcified over 2 decades into something she now mistook for professional judgment. These biases weren't just assumptions she held, they were woven into her identity as a gatekeeper, giving her a sense of control in a job where she otherwise had very little authority. Next passenger, please, she called, her voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone who had repeated the same phrase thousands of times. A middle-aged white businessman approached, sliding his boarding pass and passport across the counter. Good afternoon, Mr. Harrington, Karen said, her tone warming as she scanned his documents. Looks like we have you in seat 5C today. That's aisle access in business class. Will you need assistance with boarding? No, thank you, he replied, barely looking up from his phone. Wonderful. Have a pleasant flight, sir. She returned his documents with a genuine smile, her inspection lasting barely 15 seconds. Next came a Hispanic family, mother, father, and 2 small children. Karen's demeanor shifted subtly but noticeably. Her smile remained, but her eyes grew watchful, her movements more deliberate. Passports, please, all of them, she said, emphasizing the last part as if they might try to slip a child through without documentation. The father produced 4 passports. Karen examined each one with exaggerated scrutiny, holding them up to the light, comparing photos to faces with narrowed eyes. The family stood uncomfortable under her gaze, the children growing restless. Are these children both yours? She asked, though nothing in their documentation suggested otherwise. Yes, they are our children, the mother answered, her voice tinged with confusion and a hint of indignation she tried to suppress. Karen nodded, taking her time before finally returning their documents. Seats 32A through D. Gate closes 30 minutes before departure. Make sure children are attended at all times. No smile this time. No, have a pleasant flight. The entire interaction lasted almost 2 minutes. The family moved away, the parents exchanging glances that spoke volumes, a silent communication familiar to those who regularly experience such treatment but choose not to challenge it for fear of making the situation worse. Minutes later, an elderly white couple approached. Karen transformed again. Well, hello there, flying to London today. Wonderful, let me see those passports. She processed them quickly, adding, You two enjoy yourselves across the pond. Now, her colleague, Miguel Fuentes, noticed these shifts in Karen's behavior. He had been working with her for only 6 months, but had already recognized the pattern. He'd seen the complaints that somehow never made it past supervisor review, heard the whispers among other gate agents. But as the newest hire, he kept his head down and his observations to himself. A young black woman in a hijab approached the counter, and Karen's expression hardened imperceptibly. Passport and boarding pass, she demanded, her tone curt. The woman presented her documents. Karen examined the passport for nearly a minute, flipping through every pile, scrutinizing the photo. Purpose of your visit to the UK, Karen asked, a question she had no authority to pose as an airline employee, not a border official. I'm visiting my brother at Oxford, the woman replied, confused. Hmm. Karen continued her examination before reluctantly processing the boarding pass. Next, from her seat nearby, Zoe Jackson observed these interactions with growing unease, recognizing the pattern from her own experiences. She took a deep breath, mentally preparing herself for what might come when it was her turn. Her mother had taught her to stay calm, to be prepared, to know her rights, but also to choose her battles carefully. 5. The confrontation begins 750 words. Next passenger in line, please, Karen called, her eyes already evaluating Zoe before she even reached the podium. The shift in her expression was subtle, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a tightening around the mouth. But to Zoe, it was as familiar as her own reflection. Zoe approached with the easy confidence of a young woman raised to stand tall in any room. She smiled politely, setting her passport and printed boarding pass on the counter. "Good afternoon," Zoe said, meeting Karen's gaze directly. Karen didn't return the greeting. Her gaze flicked from Zoe's face to her braided hair, down to her casual but neat travel outfit, jeans, MIT sweatshirt, and comfortable sneakers, then back to her face. Something in Karen's expression shifted, a subtle tightening around the eyes that Zoe had seen before in other contexts. It was a look she recognized from store security guards who followed her through boutiques, from teachers who expressed surprise at her test scores, from strangers who questioned her presence in certain spaces. "Passport and boarding pass," Karen said, though they were already on the counter in front of her. "They're right there," Zoe replied, her voice steady but her pulse quickening slightly. She kept her mother's advice running through her mind: stay calm, be polite but firm, document everything. Karen picked up the passport with her fingertips as if handling something distasteful. She flipped it open to the photo page and looked between the image and Zoe's face multiple times, her expression growing increasingly skeptical. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Karen studied the document. "This photo doesn't really look like you," Karen finally said, her tone implying a question that felt more like an accusation. Zoe kept her expression neutral, though she felt heat rising to her cheeks. "It was taken 6 months ago at the post office. My hair was styled differently then, but it's definitely me." Karen hummed noncommittally, then began flipping through each page of the passport with exaggerated thoroughness. The passport was nearly new. This was Zoe's first international trip, so there were no visa stamps or entry marks to examine. Still, Karen lingered over every blank page, as if expecting to find evidence of forgery. "First time using this passport?" Karen asked, emphasis on this as if suggesting it might not belong to Zoe. "Yes, ma'am. This is my first international trip." Zoe maintained her composure, though she was acutely aware of passengers lining up behind her. Karen looked up sharply. "You're traveling alone?" "Yes." "How old are you?" 17, Zoe answered, her discomfort growing. She had already gone through this at the check-in counter and security checkpoint without issue. 17, Karen repeated, drawing out the word. "And where are you going in London?" "I'm attending the Cambridge University Summer Institute for Future Engineers. I have an acceptance letter and travel authorization from my mother if you need to see them." Zoe reached toward her backpack. "That won't be necessary," Karen said dismissively, though her tone suggested disbelief. She held the passport up to the light, angling it as if checking for watermarks. "Cambridge University? Pretty fancy school." The comment hung in the air, laden with implication. Zoe felt her shoulders tense but kept her expression neutral, just as her mother had taught her. Never show that their words affect you. Never give them that satisfaction. "Yes, it's a great opportunity," Zoe replied evenly. "I received a full scholarship for the summer program." Karen's eyebrows rose at that, skepticism etched in the lines of her face. A full scholarship, how? Fortunate. Behind Zoe, a line of passengers was forming. Miguel, at the adjacent position, was efficiently processing travelers while Karen continued her protracted examination of Zoe's documents. Several people shifted impatiently, checking watches and phones. "Date of birth," Karen demanded suddenly. "September 15, 2007. Zoe answered promptly. "Place of birth, Washington, D.C. "Mother's name?" Zoe hesitated. These weren't standard questions for airline boarding. "Dr. Diana Jackson." Karen's eyebrows rose at the title. "Doctor, is it, and what does Dr. Jackson do that lets her send her teenage daughter off to fancy European universities. The question was inappropriate, invasive, and irrelevant to boarding the flight. Zoe felt a flare of indignation but kept her voice level. My mother works for the federal government. Karen made another skeptical sound and turned to her computer, typing with deliberate slowness. Zoe noticed that other passengers had been processed in a matter of seconds, while she had now been standing at the podium for over 3 minutes. A middle-aged white man behind Zoe sighed loudly. Is there a problem here? Some of us have flights to catch. Karen looked up with a tight smile. Just doing my job, sir. Security protocols. She turned back to Zoe with a harder expression. You understand, we need to be thorough when documents raise concerns. My documents are in order, Zoe said, a hint of her mother's authority slipping into her voice. I've already been cleared by TSA and your check-in agent. Karen's eyes narrowed at the perceived challenge. Well, you're at my gate now, and I determine who boards my aircraft. We can't be too careful these days. What with all the... She didn't finish the sentence, but her meaning was clear enough. The situation was escalating, and Zoe felt increasingly trapped between asserting herself and potentially making things worse. Other passengers were watching now. The weight of their stares pressed against her back as Karen continued to find reasons to question her legitimacy. Questions she hadn't asked any of the white passengers Zoe had observed. She took a deep breath. The humiliation burned, but she reminded herself that this wasn't about her personally. It was about Karen's bias, not Zoe's worth. Still, knowing that intellectually did little to ease the emotional sting of being treated as suspect, as less than, as not belonging in a space she had every right to occupy. I'm going to need additional verification, Karen declared, her voice loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. This passport doesn't seem right to me. Zoe maintained her composure, though her heart was racing. What specific concern do you have with my passport? It was issued by the State Department this year. Karen's lips thinned. She clearly hadn't expected such a direct question. The photo discrepancy is concerning, and frankly, it's unusual for someone so young to be traveling internationally alone to such a prestigious program. I have a notarized parental consent form, Zoe said, reaching for her backpack, and my acceptance letter from Cambridge. Would you like to see those? Karen waved her hand dismissively. Anyone can print fancy letters. And how do I know this is even your backpack? The absurdity of the question momentarily stunned Zoe. Behind her, passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some were looking at their watches. Others were beginning to whisper among themselves, and a few were watching the interaction with increasing concern. Excuse me, an older white woman spoke up from behind Zoe. I couldn't help overhearing. I've been behind this young lady since security. She's had that backpack the entire time. Karen's face flushed with anger at being contradicted. Ma'am, with all due respect, airline security is my responsibility, not yours. The woman fell silent, chastised but clearly troubled by what she was witnessing. Miguel glanced over from his position, concern evident on his face, but he quickly returned to his passenger when Karen shot him a warning look. Let me see that passport again, Karen demanded, snatching it from the counter where she had set it down. Zoe watched as Karen scrutinized the document with theatrical skepticism, turning pages with exaggerated movements, holding it under her scanner multiple times as if expecting different results. The Federal Eagle emblem on the cover caught the overhead lighting as Karen rotated it in her hands. It says here you're going to be in the UK for 6 weeks, Karen noted, looking at the information on her screen. That's an awfully long trip for someone your age. How are you financing this? The question was completely inappropriate. Airline staff had no business interrogating passengers about their finances. Zoe felt her patience wearing thin. As I mentioned, I received a full scholarship to the program, including travel expenses. She answered, her voice tightening despite her efforts to remain calm. A full scholarship, Karen repeated with obvious disbelief. She looked Zoe up and down again. How convenient. Zoe heard a soft gasp from someone in line. The comment's implication was clear to everyone listening. Karen was suggesting that someone like Zoe couldn't possibly have earned such an opportunity. May I speak with your supervisor, please? Zoe asked, pulling out her phone. I'd like to document this conversation. Karen's face darkened. Put that phone away. Recording is not permitted in the boarding area. This was a lie. There was no such prohibition. but Karen's authoritative tone made Zoe hesitate. She knew her rights, but she also knew that challenging authority figures too directly could escalate situations in unpredictable ways. "I'm not trying to be difficult," Zoe said, struggling to keep her voice even. "I just want to board my flight like everyone else." "Well, you're not like everyone else, are you?" Karen muttered, just loud enough for Zoe to hear. The comment hit Zoe like a physical blow. In those 7 words lay every discriminatory assumption she had ever faced. The suggestion that her differences made her less legitimate, less deserving of basic respect and dignity. Karen turned slightly, angling her body away from the growing line of passengers. She was holding Zoe's passport in her right hand, dangling it casually by one corner. With a swift, deliberate motion that appeared accidental to casual observers but was unmistakably intentional to Zoe, Karen released the passport directly over the open trash receptacle positioned beside the podium. The dark blue booklet tumbled through the air, its gold-embossed eagle catching the light one last time before disappearing into the bin with a soft thud against discarded coffee cups and food wrappers. "Oh!" Karen exclaimed with exaggerated surprise. Her hand flew to her chest in feigned distress. "How clumsy of me! I seem to have dropped your passport." Time seemed to freeze. The terminal noise receded to a distant hum as Zoe stared at the trash can, unable to process what had just happened. Her passport, her official government identification, her literal ticket to this journey and future opportunities was now sitting in a bin filled with garbage. You threw my passport in the trash," Zoe stammered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. "I didn't throw anything," Karen said coldly, loud enough for others to hear. "If you've lost your travel documents, that's a serious security concern." She turned to the line of waiting passengers. "Next in line, please." A businessman stepped forward hesitantly, looking uncomfortably between Karen and Zoe. "But," Zoe began, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "Step aside," Karen interrupted. "If you've misplaced your passport, you'll need to contact the State Department. We have a flight to board." Several passengers had witnessed what happened. The older woman who had spoken up earlier looked horrified. 2 teenage girls nearby had their phones out, and one appeared to be recording. A business traveler frowned deeply, glancing between Zoe and Karen with growing concern. Zoe stood frozen, the enormity of what had just happened crashing over her. Without her passport, she couldn't board the flight. Without her passport, she couldn't enter the UK. Without her passport, her carefully planned future was evaporating before her eyes. And the woman responsible was now calmly processing the next passenger's boarding pass, acting as if Zoe were invisible, as if she had never existed at all. The world around Zoe seemed to blur at the edges. The constant terminal noise, announcements, conversations, rolling luggage, faded to a distant hum as shock set in. Her passport, the document her mother had so carefully helped her obtain, was now lying in a public trash bin. She felt simultaneously hot with humiliation and cold with panic, her body temperature fluctuating wildly as adrenaline coursed through her system. Time seemed to slow as her mind raced through options. None of them good. Retrieving the passport from the trash would mean digging through public garbage, an act of degradation that Karen would undoubtedly watch with satisfaction. Not retrieving it meant missing her flight and losing the opportunities she had worked so hard to earn. She stepped away from the podium, her legs moving automatically while her mind struggled to formulate a plan. Her hands trembled as she clutched her now useless boarding pass, the crisp paper a painful reminder of how close she had been to her dreams. The digital display above the gate showed Flight 815 was scheduled to begin boarding in 20 minutes. The reality of her situation began to sink in. She was about to miss this flight. The carefully arranged transportation in London, the orientation at Cambridge that started the day after tomorrow, all of it was slipping away because one woman had decided she didn't belong. "Excuse me," a soft voice said beside her. It was one of the teenage girls she'd noticed earlier. A white girl with blonde hair pulled into a ponytail. "I saw what she did. I have it on video if you need it." A small flame of hope flickered in Zoe's chest. "You recorded it." The girl nodded, her eyes wide with indignation. "She totally threw your passport away on purpose. That's messed up." "Thank you," Zoe whispered, the simple act of solidarity momentarily overwhelming her. "Could you send me that video?" "Sure," the girl replied, already holding out her phone to exchange contact information. "I'm Sophia. By the way." "Zoe," she replied, trying to smile despite the knot in her throat. "Zoe Jackson." As they exchanged information, Zoe noticed that others had witnessed the incident too. The older woman who had spoken of earlier was now talking animatedly with her husband. A businessman in line had stepped out to make a phone call, glancing back at the gate with a frown. The ripples of Karen's action were spreading. Zoe moved to a corner of the gate area, leaning against a pillar for support as her mind finally began to clear. Her mother had prepared her for situations like this, not this exact scenario, but the broader reality that she would face barriers and prejudice that others wouldn't. Dr. Diana Jackson had given her daughter both practical tools and emotional armor for navigating a world that sometimes seemed determined to block her path. In that moment of clarity, Zoe knew exactly what she needed to do. With still trembling fingers, she pulled out her phone and called the one person who would know how to fix this, her mother. As she waited for the call to connect, Zoe glanced back at the gate. Karen continued processing passengers efficiently now, all smiles and professional courtesy for the mostly white travelers in the premium boarding groups. She pointedly ignored Zoe, as if she had ceased to exist. The boarding area continued to fill with passengers for Flight 815. The plane waited just outside the window, a gleaming white Boeing 777 that would soon depart for London without her, unless something changed dramatically in the next 15 minutes. Zoe took a deep breath, summoning her mother's strength as the phone began to ring. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The phone rang once, twice. Each second felt like an eternity as Zoe watched Karen continue processing passengers, the line steadily shrinking as boarding time approached. "Zoe, everything okay, honey, doctor?" Diana Jackson's voice came through clear and professional, the background noise suggesting she was in her office. At the sound of her mother's voice, Zoe's carefully maintained composure threatened to crack. She took a deep breath, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Mom," she managed, the word coming out strained. There was an immediate shift in Diana's tone. The professional Federal Aviation Administration executive vanished, replaced by a mother whose instincts were on high alert. "What happened?" Diana asked, her voice sharp with concern. "Are you safe?" "I'm safe," Zoe assured her quickly. "But Mom, the gate agent," her voice caught, the humiliation and injustice of the situation momentarily overwhelming her. She gathered herself and continued. "The gate agent threw my passport in the trash." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. "She did what—" Diana's voice was dangerously quiet. Zoe could picture her mother's expression shifting from concern to focused anger. It was the same look she'd seen when a math teacher had suggested Zoe's perfect test scores must be the result of cheating. "We were arguing, well, not arguing. She kept questioning me, asking why I was traveling alone, how I could afford the program. She implied my passport wasn't real, and then she just dropped it in the trash can on purpose. And now she's pretending it didn't happen, and she's boarding the flight, and I don't know what to do." The words tumbled out in a rush, Zoe's voice trembling with emotion despite her best efforts. "What's the gate agent's name?" Diana asked, her tone now calm but with an undercurrent of steel that Zoe recognized. It was the voice her mother used when dealing with airline executives after safety violations, measured but implacable. "Karen Miller, Atlantic Global Airlines, Flight 815 to London Heathrow, Gate B42. Zoe could hear her mother typing rapidly. "And you're certain she deliberately disposed of your passport?" "Yes, another passenger recorded it. I saw her do it. She was holding it and just let it drop right into the trash bin beside her podium." More typing sounds came through the phone. "Listen to me very carefully. Zoe," Diana's voice took on a focused intensity that immediately commanded Zoe's full attention. "Do not move from that gate area. Do not attempt to retrieve your passport from the trash. That's evidence now. Do not engage with Karen Miller again." "But Mom, they're boarding soon. The flight leaves in less than an hour." "Zoe," Diana said, and there was absolute certainty in her voice. "That airplane is not going anywhere. I need you to trust me right now. Can you do that?" Something in her mother's tone, the unwavering confidence, the quiet authority, steadied Zoe. She took a deep breath. "Yes, I trust you. Good. Stay where you can see the gate door and the aircraft. Keep your phone on. Take photos of the gate area if you can, do so discreetly, but your priority is to remain calm and observe. Okay, Zoe whispered. I'm handling this, Zoe. Diana's voice softened momentarily, maternal love breaking through her professional resolve. What's happening to you right now is not just wrong, it's illegal, and that woman has no idea who she's messing with. For the first time since the nightmare began, Zoe felt a flicker of hope. Her mother was the most competent person she knew. If anyone could fix this situation, it was Dr. Diana Jackson. I love you, Mom. I love you too, baby. Stay strong. Justice is coming. Diana Jackson set her government phone down on her desk with deliberate care, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within her. Her spacious office at FAA headquarters in Washington, D.C. was quiet, but her mind roared with the implications of what her daughter had just told her. Someone had thrown her child's passport in the trash. Diana had spent her career navigating the complex, often discriminatory landscape of federal aviation. She had built her reputation on being measured, strategic, and impeccably professional. But this was different. This was her daughter. She closed her eyes for 3 seconds, centering herself. When she opened them, Dr. Diana Jackson, the concerned mother, seamlessly transformed into Deputy Director Jackson, federal authority personified. She pressed the intercom button on her desk phone. Sarah, I need an immediate connection to JFK Airport operations. Priority channel. Yes, Director, her assistant responded promptly. Diana turned to her computer, fingers flying across the keyboard as she accessed the FAA's flight tracking system. Atlantic Global Flight 815, scheduled departure 1:45 p.m. Current status boarding soon. Gate B42 Terminal 4. Her government phone rang. Dr. Jackson, I have Miguel Ramirez, JFK Airport Operations Manager. On line 1. Diana picked up. Mr. Ramirez, this is Dr. Diana Jackson, Deputy Director for Air Traffic Safety Oversight, Federal Aviation Administration. My badge ID is 3371 Alpha. There was a moment of silence on the line as Ramirez processed that one of the highest-ranking FAA officials had personally called him. Dr. Jackson, he responded, his voice instantly alert. How can I assist you today? Mr. Ramirez, I am formally notifying you of a Level 2 security breach at Terminal 4, Gate B42, operated by Atlantic Global Airlines. Her voice was precise, each word carefully measured. I have received a first-hand report that an airline employee, identified as Karen Miller, has deliberately mishandled and disposed of a valid United States passport in a public refuse container during the boarding process for Flight 815 to London Heathrow. Disposed of? You mean threw away a passport? Ramirez sounded incredulous. That is correct. The incident was witnessed by multiple passengers and reportedly captured on video. This constitutes, at minimum, a gross violation of document handling protocols under 49 CFR 1540-105. More seriously, it raises immediate questions about the security integrity of the staff operating that gate. Diana pulled up another screen on her computer, accessing the specific regulations she needed. I am invoking my authority under FAA Order 8900 Part 1, Volume 3, Chapter 33, to classify this as a reportable security incident requiring immediate intervention. She could hear Ramirez typing frantically on his end. Yes, Jackson, I'm dispatching security personnel to Gate B42 now. That's not sufficient, Mr. Ramirez, Diana continued, her voice taking on an even more authoritative edge. Given the compromised security situation at the gate of origin, I am formally directing a gate return for Flight 815 if it has begun pushback, or a boarding hold if it has not yet departed the gate. There was a pause. A gate return, Dr. Jackson. That's an extremely unusual measure for a document handling issue. Diana's grip on her phone tightened imperceptibly. Mr. Ramirez, this is not merely a document handling issue. This is a willful destruction of federally issued identification by airline personnel, which calls into question the security protocols of the entire flight. We cannot, in good conscience, allow an international flight to depart when its primary security checkpoint has been compromised in this manner. She continued before he could respond. Furthermore, I am directing you to immediately secure all security camera footage from Gate B42 and surrounding areas for the past hour. This footage is now considered evidence in a federal investigation. I understand, Ramirez replied, his tone now matching her seriousness. I'll contact the tower immediately and issue the hold order for Flight 815. Security team is already en route to the gate. Excellent. I will be initiating a conference call with your head of security and the CBP port director in 5 minutes. Please ensure they are available. Yes, ma'am. Diana hesitated, then decided transparency was necessary. One more thing. Mr. Ramirez, the passenger whose passport was disposed of is a minor traveling alone. Her name is Zoe Jackson. She is my daughter. There was a beat of silence as Ramirez absorbed this additional information. I understand. They're Jackson, he said, his voice reflecting a new dimension of the situation. We'll take care of her. I'm counting on that. Expect my call in 5 minutes. Diana ended the call and immediately began preparing for the conference call that would bring the full weight of Federal Aviation Authority down on JFK's Terminal 4. She opened a secure line to the Department of Justice, notifying them of a potential civil rights violation at a federally regulated facility. Next, she contacted her own assistant. Sarah, I need you to book me on the next available flight to JFK. Use my emergency authorization code and have my credentials ready. I'll be leaving immediately. As she made these arrangements, Diana felt the dual nature of her response, the federal executive deploying her authority to address a security breach, and the mother moving heaven and earth to reach her daughter's side. Both roles were integral to who she was, and both were now fully aligned in purpose. Karen Miller had no idea what she had just set in motion. Miguel Ramirez slammed down his phone and leapt to his feet, his comfortable office in JFK's operations center suddenly feeling like the epicenter of an earthquake. 23 years in airport management had taught him to recognize a career-defining the crisis when he heard one, and the call from FAA Deputy Director Jackson was exactly that. Linda, he shouted to his assistant in the outer office, get me Elizabeth Morgan from Atlantic Global, Chief of Airport Security Reynolds, and someone from CBP leadership. Conference room in 3 minutes. As Linda scrambled to make the calls, Ramirez grabbed his airport credentials and radio, already moving toward the door. And have security send the CCTV feed from Gate B42 to my tablet immediately. He speed-walked through the administrative corridors of JFK's operations center, his mind racing. A gate agent throwing away a passenger's passport was bad enough. The potential civil rights violation alone would generate massive liability. But having it trigger direct intervention from FAA leadership in Washington was unprecedented. And the fact that the passenger was the deputy director's own daughter, Ramirez, shuddered. This wasn't just a security incident anymore. It was a perfect storm of federal authority, civil rights, and personal motivation that could reshape policies across the entire aviation industry. His radio crackled to life. Security to ops manager. Go ahead, Ramirez responded, still walking briskly. Sir, we have teams en route to Gate B42 as requested. ETA 2 minutes. Excellent. Tell them to secure the area but take no action against any airline personnel until I arrive. And make sure they preserve that trash receptacle. Everything in it is now evidence. Understood, sir. Ramirez's tablet pinged with an incoming message. The security team had remotely accessed the CCTV feed from Gate B42. He paused momentarily to review the footage, watching as a black teenage girl approached the counter, followed by an increasingly tense interaction with the gate agent. Then he saw it, the unmistakable moment when Karen Miller deliberately released the passport over the trash bin. Jesus Christ, he muttered, his blood running cold. There it was, in high-definition clarity, a federal crime committed by an airline employee against a minor, captured on camera. He resumed his rapid pace toward Terminal 4, making another call as he walked. Air traffic control. This is Ramirez. ATC, Rodriguez here. Go ahead. Sir. Rodriguez, I need an immediate gate hold on Atlantic Global Flight 815 to London Heathrow. FAA directive. Highest priority. There was a brief pause. Sir, Flight 815 has just begun pushback procedures. They're disconnected from the jet bridge. Ramirez stopped in his tracks. Then halt the pushback and return the aircraft to gate. This comes directly from FAA Deputy Director Jackson. It's a level 2 security situation. Understood, sir. Issuing the return to gate order now. Meanwhile, at gate B42, the first members of the airport security team arrived. Officer James Sullivan and his partner, Officer Maria Rodriguez, approached the gate area, scanning the situation. They quickly spotted Zoe standing alone near a pillar, clutching her phone and looking simultaneously frightened and resolute. "That must be her," Rodriguez murmured to Sullivan. "The minor mentioned in the alert." Sullivan nodded and approached Karen, who was in the midst of scanning boarding passes as the final group of passengers lined up to board. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, showing his security badge. "I'm Officer Sullivan from JFK Airport Security. We need to pause the boarding process immediately." Karen looked up, irritation flashing across her face. "We're in the middle of boarding an international flight. Whatever this is, it can wait 20 minutes. Sullivan's expression remained professionally neutral, but his voice firmed. "Ma'am, this is not a request. By order of airport operations and the FAA, boarding is suspended effective immediately." Karen's eyes widened. "The FAA? What are you talking about?" Officer Rodriguez had moved to the trash receptacle beside the podium. Using gloved hands, she carefully sealed the bin with evidence tape, placing a "Do Not Disturb Security Investigation" sign on it. At that moment, Elizabeth Morgan, Atlantic Global station manager, burst into the gate area. She was a tall, imposing woman in her 50s with short salt and pepper hair and the harried look of someone who had just been informed that her day was about to become a nightmare. "Karen, stop the boarding now," she commanded. "Officers, I'm Elizabeth Morgan, station manager for Atlantic Global. What's the situation?" "Ms. Morgan, we have orders to secure this gate area and preserve evidence related to a reported security incident," Rodriguez explained. "Airport operations manager Ramirez is on his way to provide details." Karen's face had drained of color. "Evidence? What evidence? This is ridiculous." Across the tarmac, visible through the large terminal windows, Flight 815 had stopped its pushback. The massive Boeing 777 now sat awkwardly between the gate and taxiway. Neither here nor there, as ground crew scrambled to understand the sudden change in plans. Inside the aircraft, confused passengers peered out windows as the captain's voice came over the intercom, explaining that they were returning to the gate due to a procedural issue. Zoe watched the unfolding scene with a mixture of disbelief and validation. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. That airplane is not going anywhere. Somehow, from an office in Washington, D.C., Dr. Diana Jackson had brought a 300-ton aircraft to a halt. As Ramirez arrived at the gate, out of breath and clutching his tablet, he spotted Zoe and approached her directly. "Ms. Jackson," he asked quietly, "I'm Miguel Ramirez, airport operations manager. I've spoken with your mother. We're addressing this situation at the highest level. Are you all right?" Zoe nodded, still processing the rapid shift in circumstances. "Yes, I'm okay." "Good," Ramirez replied, his expression sympathetic but professional. "We'll need your statement soon. But first, we need to secure the scene and review the evidence. Please stay nearby." As promised, justice was indeed coming, and it was arriving with the full force of federal authority behind it. Captain Robert Hayes had been flying for Atlantic Global Airlines for 22 years. In that time, he had dealt with medical emergencies, severe turbulence, and even a bird strike that damaged an engine. But being ordered to return to the gate after beginning pushback, without any clear explanation from the tower, was a new one. "Tower, this is Atlantic Global 815 Heavy." He spoke into his headset, his co-pilot looking on with concern. "Please confirm the nature of the gate return order." "Atlantic 815, this is JFK Tower," came the response. "We have a Level 2 security directive from FAA headquarters. Return to gate B42 immediately." Hayes exchanged a glance with First Officer Sarah Chen. "Level 2 security directive from FAA headquarters. That wasn't a routine hiccup. That was serious." "Roger that. Tower, beginning return to gate procedure." He switched to the cabin intercom, keeping his voice calm and professional despite his own confusion. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking from the flight deck. We've been instructed by JFK Air Traffic Control to return to the gate due to a procedural matter. We don't have any further information at this time, but we'll update you as soon as we do. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for gate arrival." Throughout the aircraft, 283 passengers responded with the universal language of frustrated air travelers. Sighs, muttered complaints, and the distinct sound of itineraries mentally recalculating. In first class, Jonathan Pierce, a London-based investment banker, checked his Rolex with annoyance. Ridiculous, he muttered to no one in particular. This is why I usually fly private. 20 rows back in premium economy. The Wilson family, parents and 3 overtired children, exchanged worried glances. Do you think we'll miss our connection to Edinburgh? Mrs. Wilson whispered to her husband, who could only shrug helplessly. In the economy section, college students, tourists, and business travelers on budgets collectively groaned. A group of British teenagers returning from a school trip began speculating wildly about the cause, their theories ranging from forgotten luggage to international espionage. On the tarmac, ground crew scrambled to reposition the jet bridge as the massive aircraft slowly maneuvered back to gate B-42. The tug operator, who had just detached from the plane's nose gear, now had to reconnect and carefully guide the 300-ton machine backward, a delicate operation that required precise coordination. Inside the terminal, the scene at gate B-42 had transformed from routine boarding to controlled chaos. Additional security personnel had arrived, cordoning off a section of the gate area with blue security tape. Passengers who hadn't yet boarded were being directed to a waiting area, their confusion and frustration palpable. Karen Miller stood at the podium, her face a mask of indignation mixed with growing apprehension as she watched more security personnel arrive. This is completely unnecessary, she insisted to Elizabeth Morgan. We have a schedule to maintain. Morgan's response was icy. Karen, I suggest you stop talking right now. I've just been informed that the FAA Deputy Director personally ordered this aircraft returned to gate because of your actions. My actions, Karen's voice rose an octave. I was performing standard security protocols. That girl's documentation was suspicious. Was that before or after you threw her passport in the trash? Morgan hissed, gesturing toward the now sealed waste receptacle. Which part of your training suggested that was an appropriate response? Karen's face flushed. I didn't. It was an accident. Save it. Morgan cut her off. The CCTV footage is already being reviewed. Mr. Ramirez showed me a clip on his tablet. It's completely clear what you did. As they argued, Ramirez was coordinating the growing response team via radio. I want a full security perimeter around gate B-42. Nobody touches that trash receptacle. We need the passport recovered with proper evidence, handling protocols. And get me a direct line to the aircraft. I need to speak with Captain Hayes before passengers deplane. The activity drew attention from travelers throughout the terminal. Phones were raised, recording the unusual scene of a gate being locked down by security while an aircraft returned from an aborted departure. Social media was already buzzing with speculation about what was happening at JFK's Terminal 4. Sophia, the teenager who had recorded Karen's actions, was updating her TikTok followers in real time. You guys, this is insane. The plane is literally coming back to the gate because this agent threw away a girl's passport. There are security officers everywhere. Her video from earlier, showing Karen deliberately dropping the passport into the trash, had already been viewed over 10,000 times and was rapidly climbing. At the gate, Zoe remained calm, observing everything from her position near the pillar. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. I'm on my way. Flight leaves Reagan in 30 minutes. Stay calm and document everything. The airport manager has my direct line. The message reinforced what Zoe already sensed. The situation had escalated far beyond a simple boarding dispute. This was now a major security incident with her at the center, and somehow her mother had mobilized an entire airport's worth of authorities from hundreds of miles away. The jet bridge repositioned with a mechanical whine, reconnecting to the aircraft that should, by now, have been well on its way to the Atlantic. Inside the plane, flight attendant Julia Martinez prepared for the unusual procedure of reopening the aircraft door after it had been armed for departure. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced to the increasingly restless passengers, we have returned to the gate due to a security matter. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened until further instructions are provided. Captain Hayes' voice came through her earpiece. Julia, we have security personnel requesting access to the aircraft. Standard procedure is to allow them on board before any passengers deplane. Understood, Captain, she replied. Outside, the jet bridge door opened, and Airport Security Chief Jeff Reynolds arrived, accompanied by 2 officers and Elizabeth Morgan. Reynolds was a former FBI agent who had transitioned to aviation security after 20 years with the Bureau. His expression was grave as he surveyed the gate area. Quickly assessing the situation, Ms. Morgan, he said quietly, I understand we have a serious security breach involving document tampering and potential civil rights violations. Morgan nodded grimly. One of my gate agents, Karen Miller, deliberately disposed of a passenger's passport. The passenger is a minor, Zoe Jackson, who happens to be the daughter of FAA Deputy Director Diana Jackson. Reynolds' eyebrows rose slightly, the only indication of his surprise. I see, ma'am, and the evidence. Security camera footage shows Miller clearly dropping the passport into the trash receptacle. We also have passenger video of the incident, and the passport itself is still in the sealed bin. Excellent. And Miller, Morgan gestured toward Karen, who was now sitting at a nearby desk, looking increasingly distressed as the gravity of her situation became apparent. Has she been advised of her rights? Reynolds asked. Not yet. We were waiting for your team. Reynolds nodded. Let's proceed methodically. First, we secure this evidence and take statements from witnesses. Then we'll interview Miller. In the meantime, we need to coordinate with the captain regarding passenger management. As they spoke, the massive door of the Boeing 777 opened, and the first security personnel boarded the aircraft. Captain Hayes met them at the entrance to the flight deck. Officers, what exactly is going on? He asked, keeping his voice low so passengers couldn't overhear. Sir, we have a situation involving document mishandling by one of your gate agents. The lead officer explained. FAA has classified it as a Level 2 security incident. We need to secure the gate area, interview personnel, and verify all boarding procedures before the flight can be cleared to depart again. Hayes had been flying long enough to read between the lines. This wasn't a minor delay. This would take hours to resolve. And document mishandling sounded suspiciously like a euphemism for something much more serious. Throughout the terminal, passengers and airport staff alike watched the unprecedented scene unfold. A London-bound jumbo jet returned to gate, security swarming, and at the center of it all, a teenage girl whose passport had been thrown in the trash by someone who never imagined she had the power to ground an entire aircraft. The stage was set for a confrontation between individual discrimination and institutional accountability, with Zoe Jackson standing at the intersection of personal injustice and systemic response. The atmosphere in Terminal 4 shifted as a group of executives in crisp suits moved purposefully toward Gate B42. Leading the pack was Richard Palmer, Atlantic Global's Vice President of Eastern Seaboard Operations, who had been in a meeting at the airline's JFK administrative offices when the call came in. His face was a mask of controlled concern, but the rapid pace of his walk betrayed the urgency of the situation. Flanking him were Leslie Wong, the airline's legal counsel, and Thomas Blackwell, Director of Customer Experience, a crisis management team assembled within minutes of Elizabeth Morgan's emergency alert. As they approached, the scene at the gate came into full view, security tape creating a perimeter, officers interviewing witnesses, passengers from Flight 815 milling about in confusion, and the massive aircraft visible through the windows, its engines now silent. Jetway reconnected. Elizabeth, Palmer called, his voice tense as he approached Morgan. Brief me. Morgan led the executives to a quieter corner, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. Sir, we have a serious situation. One of our gate agents, Karen Miller, has been accused of deliberately throwing away a passenger's passport. Throwing away a... Palmer began, his face registering disbelief. Why would she do that? The passenger is a 17-year-old black girl traveling alone to a program at Cambridge. Morgan continued, we have multiple witness statements suggesting that Miller subjected her to unusually intense questioning, implied her documentation might be fraudulent, and then deliberately dropped her passport into a trash receptacle. Wong, the lawyer, inhaled sharply. Please tell me this isn't on video. Morgan's expression was grim. It's on CCTV. And at least one passenger recorded it on their phone. It's unambiguous. Christ, Palmer muttered. Where is Miller now? She's being held in the supervisor's office with security personnel. She's still denying everything, claiming the girl dropped her own passport. Blackwell, whose job focused on customer satisfaction, looked physically pained. And the passenger, the minor, Morgan gestured toward Zoe, who was now sitting in a chair near the security perimeter. her posture straight despite the obvious stress of the situation. That's her, Zoe Jackson. Palmer frowned. Jackson. Why does that name sound familiar in this context? Morgan lowered her voice further. Because approximately 20 minutes after the incident, we received a direct intervention from FAA Deputy Director Diana Jackson, who ordered the aircraft returned to gate and launched a federal security investigation. The blood drained from Palmer's face. Are you telling me that our gate agent threw away the passport of Deputy Director Jackson's daughter? It appears that way, sir. Wong closed her eyes briefly, as if in physical pain. The liability implications are catastrophic. We're looking at potential civil rights violations, discrimination claims, federal document mishandling charges, not to mention the PR nightmare, Blackwell added. If this gets out, when this gets out, the public reaction will be brutal. Palmer straightened his tie, a nervous gesture he'd developed over years of crisis management. First things first, I need to speak with the Jackson girl, express our deepest apologies, and ensure she's being properly cared for. Then I need to call our CEO and prepare him for what's coming. Leslie, start working on our legal position. Thomas, prepare a public statement. We need to get ahead of this. The executives dispersed to their assigned tasks, moving with the practiced efficiency of people accustomed to high-stakes situations. Palmer approached Zoe, his demeanor shifting to one of grave concern. Ms. Jackson, I'm Richard Palmer, Vice President of Operations for Atlantic Global Airlines. He extended his hand, which Zoe shook with surprising firmness for someone who had just been through such an ordeal. I want to personally apologize for what you experienced today. What happened was completely unacceptable and in no way reflects the values or policies of our airline. Zoe looked at him steadily. Thank you for saying that, Mr. Palmer, but it did happen, and it was your employee who did it. Palmer nodded, accepting the rebuke. You're absolutely right. There's no excuse for what occurred. I assure you that we're taking immediate action to address this situation and ensure you can continue your journey as planned. As they spoke, Officer Rodriguez approached with a clear evidence bag containing Zoe's passport. Though slightly stained from coffee residue, it appeared largely intact. Ms. Jackson, we've recovered your passport, Rodriguez said. We've documented it as evidence, but it's still valid for travel. We'll need to take your formal statement about the incident when you're ready. Palmer watched the interaction, acutely aware that this was just the beginning of what would likely be a long, complicated, and potentially very costly incident for Atlantic Global. But as he observed Zoe's composed response to the officer, he couldn't help but think that this young woman possessed a remarkable poise under pressure, clearly her mother's daughter. And that thought sent another chill down his spine. They hadn't just angered any passenger. They had discriminated against the daughter of one of the most powerful women in federal aviation regulation. The reckoning was only beginning. Let's establish a clear timeline of events, Officer James Sullivan said, setting up a small digital recorder on the table in the airport security office where witnesses were being interviewed. For the record, this is Officer James Sullivan, badge number 4783, conducting an interview regarding security incident 23 JFK 0617 at Terminal 4, Gate B42. Across from him sat Miguel Fuentes, the second gate agent who had been working alongside Karen Miller. Fuentes looked nervous, his eyes darting between Sullivan and Officer Rodriguez, who stood by the door. Mr. Fuentes, please state your full name and position for the record. Sullivan continued, Miguel Antonio Fuentes. I'm a customer service agent for Atlantic Global Airlines. Mr. Fuentes, you were present at Gate B42 during the entire incident involving Ms. Miller and passenger Zoe Jackson, correct? Miguel nodded, then realized the recorder couldn't capture that. Yes, I was there. Can you walk us through what you observed? Miguel took a deep breath. Karen, Ms. Miller, was handling the premium passenger check-in while I processed the main cabin. I noticed she was spending an unusual amount of time with this young black girl. Most passengers take maybe 15, 20 seconds to verify documents. But this was going on for several minutes. Did you hear what was being said? Not everything. I was helping my own passengers. But I heard Karen questioning the girl about why she was traveling alone, asking for additional verification. The tone was confrontational. Did that strike you as unusual? Miguel hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. It wasn't the first time I've seen Karen give extra scrutiny to certain passengers. Sullivan leaned forward slightly. Certain passengers, you know. Miguel shifted in his seat. Passengers who don't look like they belong in first class. Young people. People of color. Sullivan made a note. Have you witnessed Ms. Miller treat white passengers the same way? Not really, no. What happened next? I saw Karen holding the passenger's passport. Then there was a quick movement of her hand near the trash can. The next thing I knew, the girl was saying Karen had thrown away her passport, and Karen was denying it. And from your vantage point, what did it look like happened? Miguel's voice dropped almost to a whisper. It looked deliberate, like she let it drop on purpose. In another interview room, Elizabeth Morgan was being questioned by Jeff Reynolds, chief of airport security. Ms. Morgan, how long has Karen Miller been employed by Atlantic Global? 17 years. She started as check-in staff and moved to gate operations in 2010. And her performance record, Morgan consulted a file sheet hastily pulled from HR. Generally positive evaluations, recognized for efficiency and adherence to procedures. But, she hesitated. But, Reynolds prompted, there have been complaints, approximately 24 over the past 5 years. Most were dismissed as routine customer dissatisfaction. But looking at them now, she spread several complaint forms on the table. There's a pattern I should have recognized sooner. Reynolds examined the forms. The majority were filed by passengers with non-Western names or who had identified themselves as persons of color. Complaints ranged from unnecessarily aggressive questioning to humiliating treatment to specific allegations of discriminatory behavior. These were all investigated. Morgan looked uncomfortable. Reviewed would be a more accurate term. Karen always had explanations, security concerns, document verification issues. Given her seniority, management tended to take her word over passenger complaints. I see, Reynolds said, his expression unreadable as he made detailed notes. Meanwhile, Port Authority police officers Duca and Patel had been tasked with interviewing passengers who witnessed the incident. They had set up in a small conference room near the gate, and a line of volunteers had formed, far more witnesses than they had anticipated. It was completely deliberate, stated Rebecca Goldman, a 58-year-old retired teacher. I was directly behind the young lady in line. The gate agent was hostile from the moment she approached. The questions she asked weren't standard security questions. They were demeaning, intended to embarrass. And you witnessed the passport being disposed of, Officer Patel asked. Clear as day, she turned slightly, held it over the bin, and just let go. Then she had the audacity to act like it hadn't happened. After Goldman, they interviewed Jason Matthews, a 42-year-old business executive. I travel weekly for business, so I know the standard procedures, he explained. What happened to that girl wasn't standard. It was harassment, plain and simple. Did you see the passport being discarded? Yes, no question it was intentional. I was so shocked I almost said something. But then everything happened so fast. Suddenly there were security officers everywhere. One of the most valuable witnesses was Sophia Rivera, a 16-year-old high school student who had recorded part of the interaction on her phone. I started recording when I saw how the gate lady was treating her, Sophia explained, showing officers Duca and Patel the video. It just seemed wrong, like super racist. The video, though it started partway through the interaction, clearly showed Karen Miller holding Zoe's passport by one corner, turning slightly, and releasing it over the trash bin. The audio captured Zoe's shocked reaction and Karen's dismissive response. This is important evidence, Officer Duca said. We'll need to make a copy for our investigation. In the airport's security center, a team of technicians worked to compile all CCTV footage covering Gate B42. Multiple camera angles were available, and they were synchronized to create a complete timeline of the incident. Camera 42 Alpha shows the initial interaction, explained technician Laura Simmons to Chief Reynolds, who had returned from his interview with Morgan. You can see Miller questioning Jackson for approximately 4 minutes and 20 seconds, significantly longer than any other passenger. The footage was crystal clear, showing the increasingly tense interaction from above. Now switch to camera 42 Charlie, Simmons continued, bringing up a different angle that provided a side view of the podium. Watch her right hand. The footage showed, unmistakably, Karen Miller turning her body slightly and deliberately releasing the passport over the trash receptacle. There was nothing accidental about the movement. It's textbook deliberate action, Reynolds said grimly. The body turn, the finger release, that's intent. There's more, which Simmons added, switching to camera up 42 Delta, which covered the wider gate area. Look at how she processed the passengers before and after Jackson. The footage showed Karen quickly processing white passengers with minimal document checks, then subjecting Zoe to extended scrutiny, followed by resuming rapid processing afterward. Average time per white passenger approximately 22 seconds, Simmons noted, checking her data. Time spent on Jackson 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Reynolds nodded, his expression grave. This isn't just about a discarded passport anymore. We're looking at a clear pattern of discriminatory behavior by an airline employee in a security-sensitive position. Contact the FBI Civil Rights Division. They'll want to be involved in this. As the investigation expanded, Karen Miller sat alone in a small holding room, the magnitude of what she had done beginning to sink in. She had expected to intimidate a teenage girl, assert her authority, and continue her day as normal. Instead, she had triggered a federal investigation that was growing by the minute, and she had no idea that the most powerful force against her was about to land at JFK. Across the terminal, Zoe was providing her formal statement to Officer Ryan Rodriguez, recounting the entire incident with remarkable clarity and detail. She kept questioning my documentation in a way she hadn't done with other passengers. Zoe explained, when I offered to show additional verification, she dismissed it. Then she deliberately let my passport drop into the trash can and pretended it was my fault. And you're certain the action was deliberate? Rodriguez asked. Absolutely certain. She was holding it by one corner, turned slightly, and released it directly over the bin. Then she immediately called for the next passenger and told me to step aside. Rodriguez nodded, impressed by Zoe's composed testimony. You're handling this very professionally, Miss Jackson. Zoe managed a small smile. My mother always taught me to remain calm in difficult situations and to document everything. I guess her lessons are paying off today. What neither Zoe nor the investigating officers yet realized was how extensively those lessons would reshape protocols across the entire aviation industry in the months to come. The conference room in JFK Security Center had been transformed into a command post for the rapidly expanding investigation. A large screen dominated the front wall, currently displaying multiple synchronized camera feeds from Gate B42. Around a polished table sat representatives from various authorities involved Airport Security Chief Reynolds, Port Authority Police Captain Rivera, Atlantic Global VP Richard Palmer, and Elizabeth Morgan. All eyes were fixed on the screen as Laura Simmons, the senior security technician, walked them through the compiled footage. We've synchronized feeds from 6 different cameras covering the gate area, she explained, using a laser pointer to indicate each view. This gives us continuous coverage from all angles with no blind spots. The system timestamps down to the 100th of a second, so we can establish a precise timeline. She tapped a key, and the footage began playing. At 12:42:37, Zoe Jackson approaches the counter. Note that Karen Miller has just finished processing a white male passenger. Total interaction time 19 seconds. The group watched as the scene played out in silent, high-definition clarity. Miller's body language visibly changed as Zoe approached, a stiffening of posture, a subtle shift in expression. We can see Miller immediately takes Jackson's passport and begins an extended examination. Simmons continued. She holds it up to the light repeatedly, flips through every page, and compares the photo to Jackson multiple times. While Palmer winced visibly as the discriminatory treatment unfolded before them. The evidence was damning, far worse than he had initially feared. At 12:44:52, Miller begins questioning Jackson more intensely. We don't have audio from the security cameras, but according to witness statements, she was asking about Jackson's travel plans, how she could afford the program, and implying her documentation might be fraudulent. Captain Rivera leaned forward. Can we see the passenger line during this interaction? Simmons nodded, switching to a wider angle. Camera 42 Echo shows the queue. You can see several passengers becoming visibly impatient. This matches witness statements that the questioning seemed excessive and inappropriate. The footage continued. showing the increasingly tense interaction. Now, at 12:46:18, we reach the critical moment, Simmons said, slowing the playback to half speed. Watch Miller's right hand carefully. In excruciating detail, the footage showed Miller turning her body approximately 30 degrees to the right, holding the passport by one corner, and then deliberately releasing it over the trash receptacle. The movement was smooth, controlled, and unquestionably intentional. Jesus, Palmer muttered, running a hand over his face. Can you zoom in on her face during this action? Chief Reynolds requested. Simmons complied, enlarging Miller's face at the moment of release. The expression was subtle but unmistakable, a slight curl of the lip, a glint of satisfaction in the eyes. That's what we call consciousness of guilt, Captain Rivera commented. She knows exactly what she's doing. Continue the playback at normal speed, Reynolds instructed. The footage showed Zoe's shocked reaction, her hand reaching out instinctively as the passport disappeared into the bin. Miller's immediate denial was evident from her body language. Hands spread, head shaking, the universal posture of false innocence. At 12:46:47, Miller turns to the next passenger in line, effectively dismissing Jackson. Simmons narrated, Jackson steps aside, clearly distressed, and makes a phone call at 12:48:03. To her mother, Morgan supplied quietly. The gravity of that simple statement hung in the air. No one needed to articulate the implications of a distressed teenager calling her mother, who happened to be a high-ranking federal aviation official, after experiencing discrimination and having her passport thrown away. What happens next is instructive, Simmons continued, advancing the footage. Watch Miller's processing of subsequent passengers. The comparative footage was damning. White passengers were processed in an average of 22 seconds. The only other passenger of color in the premium line, an Asian man in a business suit, received 47 seconds of scrutiny, twice the time of white passengers, but still less than a quarter of what Zoe had endured. This establishes a clear pattern of disparate treatment, Rivera observed. There's one more angle I think you should see, Simmons said, switching to yet another camera view. Camera 42 Foxtrot captures the wider gate area, including passengers waiting to board. This footage showed something they hadn't focused on before the reactions of other passengers. Several were visibly disturbed by what they had witnessed. Sofia Rivera could be seen holding up her phone, clearly recording the incident. An older white woman appeared to be expressing concern to her husband. A businessman in line was frowning deeply. The witnesses corroborate what the footage shows, Reynolds confirmed. We've taken statements from 12 passengers so far who directly observed the incident. Their accounts are consistent with the visual evidence. Palmer turned to the airline's legal counsel, who had been silently taking notes throughout the presentation. Leslie, where do we stand legally? Leslie Wong set down her pen, her expression grave. Based on this footage alone, we're looking at multiple serious issues. Clear evidence of discriminatory treatment by an employee, willful destruction or improper handling of federal documentation, potential civil rights violations. The airline's liability is substantial. She paused, consulting her notes. Beyond the obvious civil liability, there are potential criminal implications for Miller personally. Destroying or improperly handling a U.S. passport could violate 18 U.S. Code 1543, which carries penalties, including imprisonment. And that's before we factor in the FAA's involvement, Reynolds added. Deputy Director Jackson has classified this as a Level 2 security breach, which triggers mandatory reporting and investigation protocols under federal aviation regulations. Palmer loosened his tie slightly, the full magnitude of the situation settling on his shoulders. So we have irrefutable evidence of an Atlantic Global employee deliberately throwing away a teenage passenger's passport, captured on multiple security cameras and corroborated by numerous witness statements. And the passenger happens to be the daughter of one of the highest-ranking officials in the FAA. That's an accurate summary. Yes, Reynolds confirmed grimly. The conference room door opened, and an airport security officer entered hurriedly. Chief Reynolds, I've just received word that Deputy Director Jackson is on final approach to JFK. Her office has requested ground transportation to meet her at the Executive Aviation Terminal, ETA 20 minutes. The atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly. The investigation had been proceeding with methodical efficiency, But the imminent arrival of Dr. Diana Jackson, not just as a federal authority, but as the mother of the young woman who had been discriminated against, added a new dimension of urgency. "Thank you," Reynolds responded. "Please arrange for her to be escorted directly to this command post upon arrival." As the officer departed, Reynolds turned back to the group. "Ladies and gentlemen, I suggest we prepare ourselves. This situation is about to escalate to an entirely new level." On the screen, frozen in high-definition clarity, was the image of Karen Miller in the act of deliberately dropping Zoe Jackson's passport into the trash, a single moment of cruelty that had spiraled into a multi-agency federal investigation, all captured in perfect, irrefutable detail by the unblinking eyes of airport security cameras. "This is a secured line. Please identify yourself." The crisp, authoritative voice of Dr. Diana Jackson filled the speakerphone in the JFK Airport Operations Conference Room. Miguel Ramirez, JFK Airport Operations Manager. Elizabeth Morgan, Atlantic Global Airlines Station Manager. Jeff Reynolds, Chief of Airport Security. JFK, Captain Anna Rivera, Port Authority Police. Aaron Martinez, CBP Port Director for JFK. The assembled officials sat tensely around the conference table, all aware of the extraordinary nature of this call. It wasn't every day that a deputy director of the FAA personally intervened in an airport incident, let alone from 30,000 feet above the Atlantic. "Thank you all for joining on short notice," Dr. Jackson continued. "I'm currently on an FAA priority flight to JFK, ETA approximately 18 minutes. I've reviewed the preliminary security reports and CCTV footage forwarded to my secure tablet. Before I arrive, I want to ensure we're all operating with the same understanding of the situation and its implications." Her voice was measured, professional, giving no indication that the victim in this case was her daughter. She was operating purely in her official capacity, and everyone on the call understood the distinction. "First, to confirm Atlantic Global employee Karen Miller has been detained." "Correct." "Yes, ma'am," Captain Rivera responded. "She's currently in a secure holding room with a Port Authority officer present. She's been read her rights but has not been formally arrested pending further investigation." "Good. And Diana caught herself. "And passenger Zoe Jackson has been provided appropriate care and support." "Yes, Deputy Director." Morgan answered quickly. "Miss Jackson has been moved to our premium lounge with a customer care representative. Her passport has been recovered, documented as evidence, and determined to be valid for travel once released. Atlantic Global is prepared to accommodate her on our next London flight with a first-class upgrade and full support services." "I appreciate that, Ms. Morgan," Diana responded, her tone neutral. "Now, let's address the regulatory and legal framework of this incident. Mr. Martinez, from CBP's perspective, what are we looking at regarding document mishandling?" The Customs and Border Protection Port Director cleared his throat. "Deputy Director, the willful destruction or improper handling of a U.S. passport potentially violates several federal statutes, including 18 U.S. Code 1543. Since the passport was recovered and appears to remain functional as a travel document, we're likely looking at attempted interference rather than destruction, but it's still a serious federal offense." "Agreed," Diana said. "And beyond the specific passport incident, there's the broader security implications. Chief Reynolds, your assessment." Reynolds sat up straighter, though Dr. Jackson couldn't see him. "Deputy Director, from a security perspective, this incident raises serious concerns about Atlantic Global's document verification procedures and personnel conduct. Under 49 CFR 1540-105, we're required to maintain the integrity of secure areas and screening procedures. An airline employee deliberately mishandling federal travel documents constitutes a breach of those protocols." "Exactly," Diana affirmed. "And the implications go beyond this single incident. Ms. Morgan, I've reviewed the passenger complaints filed against Ms. Miller over the past 3 years. There appears to be a consistent pattern of disproportionate scrutiny applied to passengers of color. Is Atlantic Global aware of this pattern?" A heavy silence fell over the conference room. Morgan looked to Palmer, who nodded grimly for her to answer truthfully. "Deputy Director," Morgan began carefully, "those complaints were processed through our standard customer service channels. Each was reviewed individually, but I must acknowledge that we failed to identify the statistical pattern until this incident forced us to look more closely. I see. Diana's voice remained measured, but there was a new edge to it. So what you're telling me is that your airline had documented evidence of a potential civil rights issue with a specific employee and failed to recognize or address it until it escalated to a federal security incident. That is an accurate assessment, Morgan admitted, visibly uncomfortable. Mr. Ramirez, Diana continued, what is the operational status of Flight 815 at this time? The aircraft remains at Gate B42, Deputy Director. Passengers have been informed of an unspecified security matter requiring investigation. Captain Hayes and his crew are standing by for further instructions. Thank you. As of this moment, I am formally classifying this as a Level 2 security incident under FAA Order 8900-1, Volume 3, Chapter 33, Section 2. Diana's voice took on the unmistakable tone of an executive decision being rendered. This classification triggers mandatory investigation protocols, including review of all security procedures at the gate of origin. She paused to let this sink in. Captain Rivera, I'm authorizing Port Authority Police to conduct a complete passenger manifest verification for Flight 815. Every boarding pass must be cross-checked against travel documents to ensure that no other security lapses occurred at this compromised checkpoint. Understood, Deputy Director, Rivera replied. We'll begin the verification process immediately. Mr. Palmer, Diana addressed the airline VP directly for the first time. Atlantic Global now has a serious compliance issue on its hands. Under 14 CFR Part 119, your airline's operating certificate requires adherence to all federal security protocols. This incident represents a significant breach of those requirements. Palmer swallowed hard. We understand the gravity of the situation. Deputy Director, Atlantic Global is committed to full cooperation with the investigation and will implement any necessary corrective actions. I'm glad to hear it, Diana responded, her tone making it clear that words alone wouldn't suffice. Because effective immediately, I am directing the FAA to conduct a comprehensive review of Atlantic Global's document handling procedures and staff training at all U.S. points of operation. The executives exchanged alarmed glances. Such a review would be extensive, expensive, and potentially damaging to the airline's reputation. Furthermore, Diana continued relentlessly, I am requiring Atlantic Global to submit a detailed corrective action plan within 72 hours, addressing both the specific incident and the systemic issues it has revealed. This plan must include revised training protocols, enhanced oversight measures, and a comprehensive anti-bias program for all customer-facing staff. She paused for a moment, then added, I should note that failure to adequately address these issues could result in civil penalties under 49 U.S.C. 46301, which allows fines of up to $25,000 per violation. Palmer quickly calculated the potential financial exposure in his head and blanched. If each of the documented complaints against Millar were classified as a separate violation, they could be looking at penalties in the millions. We understand completely, Deputy Director, he assured her. Atlantic Global takes this matter extremely seriously. One final point, Diana said, her voice taking on an even more official tone. I've consulted with the Department of Transportation's Office of Civil Rights, and they are opening a separate investigation under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination by airlines receiving federal funds. Their investigators will be coordinating with local authorities. The atmosphere in the conference room grew heavier with each new layer of federal scrutiny being applied. I will be landing shortly. Diana concluded, in the meantime, I expect Atlantic Global to ensure that passenger Zoe Jackson receives all necessary support and assistance. Are there any questions before I disconnect? The silence that followed was answer enough. Very well, I'll see you all at JFK in approximately 15 minutes. As the call ended, the executives and officials in the conference room exchanged grim looks, the full weight of federal intervention settling upon them. Richard Palmer loosened his tie and turned to his legal counsel. Leslie, he said quietly, what's our exposure here? The lawyer's expression was bleak. Significant. Between potential FAA penalties, civil rights violations, possible litigation from the Jackson family, and the PR damage, we're looking at a multi-million-dollar event, minimum. And that's assuming we cooperate fully and implement immediate corrective measures. Palmer nodded, reaching for his phone. I need to call the CEO. This just became a board-level crisis. While the official investigation proceeded through formal channels, a parallel public trial was unfolding across the digital landscape. What had begun as Sofia Rivera's shaky cell phone video had ignited a social media firestorm that was spreading with algorithmic efficiency. Sofia, the 16-year-old who had recorded Karen throwing away Zoe's passport, had uploaded the 47-second clip to TikTok with the caption, "Watch this racist gate agent throw away a black girl's passport at JFK, #discrimination, #Atlantic Global, #passport and trash." Within minutes, the video had accumulated thousands of views. Within an hour, it had surpassed 100,000. The hashtag passport in trash was trending nationally, joined quickly by #Atlantic Global Racism and #Flying While Black. In the Atlantic Global Premium Lounge, customer care representative Jessica Martinez discreetly monitored the social media explosion on her tablet while maintaining a professional demeanor with Zoe. "Would you like anything else to drink, Ms. Jackson?" she asked, setting down a fresh glass of water. "No, thank you," Zoe replied, her attention focused on her own phone. Despite her outward composure, she was stunned by the viral spread of what had happened to her. Friends from school were texting her links to news stories and social media posts. Her debate team group chat was exploding with messages of support and outrage. Across various platforms, the incident was being dissected, analyzed, and amplified. On Twitter, civil rights attorney Benjamin Crump had shared the video to his millions of followers. "This is what discrimination looks like in 2025. A gate agent deliberately throws away a young black woman's passport, then denies it happened. Thankfully, it was caught on camera. Atlantic Global, we're watching your response carefully." The tweet had been viewed 0.7 million times and retweeted over 50,000 times in just under an hour. On Instagram, travel influencer Jet Set Jamie, with her 3.2 million followers, posted a reaction video. "As someone who flies weekly, I'm disgusted by what happened at JFK today. This isn't just bad customer service, it's blatant racism. Atlantic Global needs to do more than fire one employee. This is systemic." CNN had picked up the story for their website with the headline, "Airline Gate Agent Throws Away Black Teen's Passport, Grounds Flight After FAA Intervention." The article included statements from witnesses and aviation experts discussing the unprecedented nature of a flight being returned to gate over such an incident. In Atlantic Global's corporate headquarters in Atlanta, the social media crisis team had been activated. Digital specialists monitored mentions, engagement metrics, and sentiment analysis in real time as the company's reputation plummeted by the minute. "It's spreading exponentially," reported Alicia Washington, director of digital communications, to the Emergency Executive Committee assembled in the boardroom. "We've had a 2,700% increase in mentions in the last hour, with negative sentiment at 89%. The video has been viewed approximately 2.3 million times across platforms." CEO Jonathan Reed, who had been pulled from a charity golf tournament, looked grim. "What are we saying publicly? We've issued a preliminary statement acknowledging the incident and stating that the employee has been removed from duty pending investigation," Alicia explained, "but it's being overwhelmed by the sheer volume of negative content. People are sharing their own stories of discrimination using our hashtag." On the boardroom screen, a real-time dashboard displayed the unfolding digital disaster. Atlantic Global's stock had already dropped 3.7% as investors reacted to the viral controversy and news of the FAA investigation. "The latest development," Alicia continued, her expression grave, "is that several civil rights organizations have issued statements. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund is specifically calling for a comprehensive federal investigation into Atlantic Global's practices. Back at JFK, Atlantic Global's gate agents at other terminals were facing the immediate fallout. Passengers approaching counters with phones in hand, some filming interactions, others making pointed comments about passport handling. The atmosphere had changed perceptibly as staff became hyper-aware of their every action being potentially scrutinized. In the security center, Chief Reynolds watched the social media metrics with a mixture of concern and professional interest. "This is going to complicate our investigation," he noted to Captain Rivera. "Everyone involved now feels the pressure of public scrutiny." Rivera nodded. "The court of public opinion moves faster than our procedures. By the time we complete our official report, millions of people will have already rendered their verdict. Outside Gate B42, the last of Flight 815's passengers had been directed to a waiting area. Many had their phones out, some discovering in real time that they were part of a viral news story. The jumbo jet sat silently at the gate, a massive, tangible symbol of how a single act of discrimination could literally ground the machinery of modern travel. As Dr. Diana Jackson's FAA flight made its final approach to JFK, the digital tsunami continued to build momentum, transforming a personal injustice into a national conversation about race, accountability, and the power of documentation in the digital age. Karen Miller sat alone in the small interview room, her once immaculate Atlantic Global uniform now rumpled after hours of questioning. The room was deliberately austere, a metal table bolted to the floor, 3 chairs, and a wall-mounted camera that recorded every word, every gesture, every flicker of expression. The door opened, and Captain Anna Rivera entered, accompanied by FBI Special Agent Marcus Coleman. Coleman, a tall black man in his 40s with a precisely trimmed beard and impeccable suit, carried a thin file folder. His presence signified the escalation of the investigation to federal level. "Miss Miller," Captain Rivera began, "this is Special Agent Coleman from the FBI Civil Rights Division. He'll be joining our interview." Karen's eyes widened. "The FBI, this is absurd. I've been detained for hours over a misunderstanding with a difficult passenger." Coleman set down his folder and took a seat, his movements unhurried and deliberate. "Miss Miller, I'm going to be direct with you. The misunderstanding you refer to was captured on multiple security cameras from various angles. We have clear, unambiguous footage of you deliberately dropping a United States passport into a trash receptacle. Karen began, but Coleman continued. "In addition, we've interviewed 17 witnesses who observed the interaction between you and Mrs. Jackson. Their accounts are remarkably consistent. Furthermore, we have passenger-recorded video that includes audio of your exchange." He opened the folder and slid a document across the table. "This is a statistical analysis of passenger complaints filed against you over the past 3 years. Of the 27 formal complaints, 23 were filed by passengers of color. Did you know that?" Karen stared at the document, her face pale. "That's just a coincidence. I processed thousands of passengers." "Indeed," so Coleman replied. "And our analysis shows that you subjected non-white passengers to enhanced document scrutiny at a rate approximately 4.3 times higher than white passengers." Rivera leaned forward. "Ms. Miller, at this point, denying what happened is not in your best interest. We have the evidence. What we're trying to understand now is why it happened." Karen's composure began to crack. "You don't understand the pressure we're under. We have to make split-second decisions about passengers, about security risks." "And what about Zoe Jackson made her appear to be a security risk?" Coleman asked, his tone neutral but his gaze intense. She seemed suspicious, traveling alone at her age, to a fancy program in England. The passport looked new, even to her own ears. Karen's justification sounded hollow. "Ms. Miller," Coleman said, "the passport looked new because it was new. This was Ms. Jackson's first international trip. She is a 17-year-old honor student who earned a scholarship to Cambridge University's engineering program." He paused, letting that sink in. "What we're seeing here isn't security vigilance. The evidence points to a pattern of bias that culminated in a deliberate attempt to prevent a young black woman from traveling by disposing of her federally issued identification." Karen's hands began to tremble slightly. That's not what I... Let me be clear about the seriousness of your situation." Coleman continued. "You are potentially facing federal charges under 18 U.S. Code 1543 for passport misuse, civil rights violations under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, and interfering with air transportation security under 49 U.S. Code 46314. Rivera added, "These are serious federal offenses, Ms. Miller. The passport incident alone carries penalties of up to 25 years imprisonment." Karen's facade finally crumbled. 25 years. For a passport, I didn't destroy it. It was still in the bin. Intent matters in federal law, Coleman explained. The act of deliberately disposing of a passenger's federal travel document with the apparent intent to prevent them from traveling constitutes a serious offense, regardless of whether the document was ultimately destroyed. "I want a lawyer," Karen said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's your right," Rivera acknowledged. "But before we pause this interview, I want to make sure you understand one final detail." She slid another document across the table. "This is the passenger manifest for Flight 815. I'd like you to look at seat 34B, the seat originally assigned to Zoe Jackson." Karen reluctantly looked down at the manifest, then back up in confusion. "I don't understand. Zoe Jackson is the daughter of Dr. Diana Jackson, Deputy Director for Air Traffic Safety Oversight at the Federal Aviation Administration," Rivera explained. "The same Dr. Jackson who personally ordered Flight 815 returned to the gate and launched the federal investigation you are now the subject of." The color drained from Karen's face as the full magnitude of her actions finally hit her. She had not merely discriminated against any teenager. She had thrown away the passport of the daughter of one of the most powerful aviation officials in the country. I didn't know," she whispered. "That's precisely the point, Miss Miller." Coleman replied with quiet gravity. "You never bothered to find out who Zoe Jackson really was before deciding she didn't deserve to be treated with basic human dignity. And that failure of judgment has brought you to this moment." As Karen slumped in her chair, the reality of her situation finally sank in. Her 17-year career, her financial security, her freedom, all of it now hung in the balance because of a single act of prejudice that had been captured on camera for the world to see. The atmosphere in the premium lounge had shifted subtly but definitively. Where Zoe had initially been treated with the awkward solicitude reserved for victims of unfortunate incidents, the staff now approached her with something closer to deference. Word had spread about her mother's identity and imminent arrival, transforming Zoe from a wronged passenger to a VIP with connections at the highest levels of federal authority. Elizabeth Morgan entered the lounge, accompanied by Richard Palmer. Their expressions were carefully composed, but the tension in their shoulders betrayed the gravity of the situation. "Ms. Jackson," Morgan began, "I want to personally update you on the developments regarding your flight and travel arrangements." Zoe set down her phone, facing the executives with remarkable composure for a teenager who had endured such a traumatic experience. "First and foremost," Morgan continued, "we have recovered your passport." She gestured to a security officer who stepped forward with a clear evidence bag containing the document. "It has been documented as evidence in the ongoing investigation, but has been cleared for return to you for travel purposes." The officer handed the passport to Zoe with a respectful nod. Though slightly stained from coffee residue, it was intact and functional, the Golden Eagle emblem still gleaming under the lounge lighting. Palmer cleared his throat. "Ms. Jackson, as Vice President of Operations for Atlantic Global, I want to extend our deepest and most sincere apologies for the unconscionable treatment you experienced today. There is absolutely no excuse for what happened, and I want you to know that Karen Miller has been terminated from her position, effective immediately." Zoe accepted the apology with a slight nod, her expression remaining carefully neutral, a skill she had learned from watching her mother navigate professional challenges. "Furthermore," Palmer continued, "we are taking immediate steps to address the broader implications of this incident. Atlantic Global is launching a comprehensive review of our training procedures, implementing mandatory anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff, and establishing new oversight protocols for document handling." The corporate speak was familiar to Zoe. Her mother often discussed the carefully crafted language airlines used after incidents. What mattered were actions, not promises. As if reading her thoughts, Morgan added something more concrete. "Ms. Jackson, we've made arrangements for you to travel on our next flight to London, which departs at 7:30 p.m. You've been upgraded to first class, and all expenses, including in-flight connectivity, meals, and ground transportation in London, will be complimentary." "Thank you," Zoe replied simply. She appreciated the gesture but understood that no amount of luxury could erase what had happened. Morgan hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly been weighing on the airline executives. "Your mother, Dr. Jackson, do you know when she's expected to arrive?" Before Zoe could answer, the lounge door opened again. A ripple of awareness passed through the space as conversations quieted and heads turned. Dr. Diana Jackson stood in the entrance, her professional authority radiating from her like a physical force. Though dressed in a simple navy suit rather than a uniform, There was no mistaking her federal authority. For a brief moment, Zoe saw the dual nature of her mother in perfect clarity, the powerful deputy director who commanded respect from airline executives and federal agents, and the mama bear whose eyes immediately sought her daughter across the room, filled with fierce, protective love. Diana crossed the lounge with measured steps, nodding briefly to Palmer and Morgan before reaching Zoe. Mother and daughter embraced, a private moment of connection despite the public setting. "Are you okay?" Diana asked quietly. "I am now," Zoe replied, drawing strength from her mother's presence. Diana turned to face the airline executives, her arms still around Zoe's shoulders. The subtle shift in her posture signaled a transition from concerned mother back to federal authority. "Mr. Palmer, Miss Morgan," she acknowledged them with professional courtesy. "I understand you've made arrangements for Zoe's continued travel." "Yes, Deputy Director," Morgan confirmed. "We've rebooked Miss Zoe Jackson on our evening flight to London in first class, with all amenities complimentary." "That's appropriate," Diana nodded. "However, I should inform you that I've already contacted Cambridge University regarding this incident. They've arranged for Zoe to arrive a day later than planned without any academic penalty." The subtle message was clear. Diana wasn't just ensuring her daughter's travel arrangements, she was leveraging her connections to minimize the impact of Atlantic Global's failure. "I'll be accompanying my daughter to London," Diana continued. "I've booked myself on the same flight this evening." The executives exchanged glances, recognizing that the highest-ranking FAA official involved in their investigation would now be observing their service firsthand. "Of course, Dr. Jackson," Palmer replied. "We'll ensure you're seated together." As the executives retreated to make the necessary arrangements, Zoe looked at her mother with a mixture of gratitude and admiration. This wasn't just about a passport anymore. It was about accountability, consequences, and the quiet power of refusing to let injustice stand. "You really grounded an entire plane," Zoe whispered. Diana's lips curved in a small smile. "Nobody messes with my daughter." The fluorescent lighting in the airport detention room cast harsh shadows across Karen Miller's face as she sat across from her union representative, Martin Graves. The table between them held a stack of documents, termination papers, investigation reports, and preliminary legal notifications that would fundamentally alter the course of her life. "They can't just fire me," Karen insisted, her voice hoarse after hours of questioning. "I have 17 years with the company. There are procedures, protocols." "Karen," Martin interrupted gently, "I need you to understand the severity of this situation. Atlantic Global has invoked the gross misconduct clause in your employment contract. This allows for immediate termination without the standard progressive discipline process." He pushed the termination letter toward her. The official language was clinical and devastating. "Employment terminated effective immediately for willful misconduct, discriminatory behavior toward passengers, and improper handling of federal documentation in violation of company policy and federal regulations." "But it was just a passport," Karen protested, though her voice lacked conviction. "I didn't destroy it. It was right there in the trash." Martin sighed, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. "It wasn't just a passport, Karen. It was a federal document, and your actions have been classified as intentional interference with air transportation security, a federal offense. The union can challenge the termination if you want, but frankly, with the video evidence and witness statements, we don't have a strong case." Outside the detention room, the machinery of consequences continued to grind forward. In a nearby office, FBI Special Agent Coleman conferred with Assistant S. Attorney Sophia Diaz regarding potential criminal charges. "The evidence is unambiguous," Coleman explained, reviewing the case file. "Multiple camera angles show deliberate disposal of the passport. Statistical analysis demonstrates a pattern of discriminatory behavior over time. Witness statements corroborate the video evidence." Diaz nodded, her expression thoughtful. "The question becomes which charges to prioritize. We have options under several federal statutes." She ticked them off on her fingers. "Passport misuse under 18 U.S.C. 1543, interference with security screening personnel under 49 U.S.C. 44901, civil rights violations under Title VI. Each carries significant penalties. The civil rights angle seems particularly strong." Coleman noted, The statistical pattern of discrimination is compelling. 4.3 times more scrutiny for passengers of color is far beyond any reasonable security protocol. Agreed, Diaz replied. I think we pursue a dual approach: criminal charges for the passport incident and a parallel civil rights investigation. The latter could have broader implications for the airline's practices beyond this single employee. Back in the detention room, Martin was explaining the immediate practical consequences to Karen. Your airport credentials have been revoked, he said, pointing to another document. This is a mandatory exclusion notice. You're barred from all secure areas of JFK and any other airport where Atlantic Global operates. Karen stared at him in disbelief. They're banning me from airports. How am I supposed to fly home? You'll be escorted through public areas only to exit the terminal. The ban applies to secure areas, gates, tarmac, operational zones. And Karen, this ban is likely to become nationwide once the TSA reviews the case. The implications began to sink in. Her career in aviation was over, not just with Atlantic Global, but potentially with any airline or airport-related business. What about legal costs? She asked, her voice smaller now. If they're pressing charges? Martin's expression was grave. The union legal fund only covers workplace disputes, not criminal defense. You'll need to retain your own attorney for that aspect. As they spoke, airport security officers were processing Karen's personal effects from the employee locker room. Her uniform shirts, family photos, and accumulated mementos from 17 years of airline service were being packed into a cardboard box, the universal symbol of terminated employment. Security Officer Davies cataloged each item meticulously. One Atlantic Global identification badge, deactivated. One security access card, deactivated. One personal cell phone. One set of keys. His partner, Officer Johnson, sealed Karen's locker with evidence tape. HR wants this preserved until they complete their internal review. In the terminal, the ripple effects of Karen's actions continued to spread. Gate agents at other Atlantic Global counters had received an emergency protocol update from management, urgent, effective immediately. All passenger documentation must be handled with explicit care and respect. Document verification should be conducted in full view of passengers at all times. Any concerns about document authenticity must be referred to a supervisor before action is taken. These procedures will remain in effect until comprehensive retraining is completed. At corporate headquarters in Atlanta, the Human Resources Department was conducting an emergency audit of employee complaint records. A team of data analysts had been tasked with identifying any other staff members with patterns similar to Karen's, disproportionate complaints from passengers of color, or unusual document handling incidents. We've flagged 12 other customer service representatives with statistically significant disparities, reported HR Director Patricia Wallace to the crisis management team. None as extreme as Miller's case, but concerning enough to warrant immediate review. CEO Jonathan Reed's expression was grim. I want interviews with all 12 by end of business tomorrow. If we have a systemic problem, I need to know before the Department of Transportation does. Meanwhile, Karen's personal ordeal continued. After signing her termination papers with a shaking hand, she was escorted by port authority officers through the terminal toward the exit. Her Atlantic Global badge had been confiscated, her access cards deactivated. Her 17-year career ended in a single afternoon. The walk of shame through the public terminal was excruciating. Though not technically under arrest, the security escort made her status clear to observers. Some passengers recognized her from social media videos that had now been viewed millions of times. Whispers and pointing followed her progress. That's her, the one who threw away the girl's passport. Can't believe she did that. They should arrest her. Karen kept her eyes down, her face burning with humiliation. The airport she had worked in for nearly 2 decades now felt alien and hostile. At the terminal exit, Officer Sullivan delivered the final procedural blow. Ms. Miller, this exit notification formally bars you from entering secured areas of any Atlantic Global operation without prior written authorization. Violation of this order may result in criminal trespassing charges. Do you understand these restrictions? Yes, Karen whispered, taking the document with trembling fingers. You're free to leave the airport through public areas. Sullivan continued, his tone professionally neutral. However, I am required to inform you that the FBI investigation remains ongoing, and you may be contacted regarding potential federal charges. As Karen stepped outside into the harsh afternoon sunlight, the full weight of what she had done finally crushed down upon her. In a moment of casual cruelty toward a teenager she had deemed unworthy of respect, she had destroyed her career, damaged her financial security, and exposed herself to potential federal prosecution. For the first time, she began to understand the magnitude of the power she had wielded so carelessly. The authority to verify documents, to determine who could and couldn't board a flight, had never really belonged to her personally. It had been entrusted to her by the airline, the government, and ultimately, the public. And she had abused that trust in a way that was now impossible to deny or excuse. Karen Miller stood on the curb outside JFK International Airport, no longer a gatekeeper, but an outcast from the very system she had used to exclude others. The symmetry wasn't lost on her, though its bitter justice provided no comfort as she waited for a taxi to take her home to an uncertain future. The evening departure area of Terminal 4 hummed with the usual pre-flight energy, but at Gate B18, where Flight 839 to London was preparing to board, there was an unmistakable air of heightened attention. Word had spread through JFK's staff about the afternoon's events, and the evening crew for Atlantic Global had been thoroughly briefed on the VIP passengers joining their flight. Gate agent Thomas Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran with an impeccable service record, personally supervised every detail of the pre-boarding process. His team had been reinforced with senior staff, and a representative from airport security stood discreetly nearby, a visible reminder of the scrutiny now facing the airline's operations. First boarding call for Atlantic Global Flight 839 to London Heathrow, Rodriguez announced, his voice warm and professional. We invite our passengers requiring special assistance, families with young children, and our active military personnel to board at this time. In the adjacent premium lounge, Zoe and Diana Jackson gathered their belongings, preparing to join the flight during the first-class boarding call. Zoe had spent the afternoon processing the whirlwind of events, her emotions fluctuating between lingering distress over the morning's humiliation and a sense of validation from the swift, decisive response. "Ready?" Diana asked, giving her daughter's hand a gentle squeeze. Zoe nodded, straightening her shoulders. The same terminal that had been the site of such injustice hours earlier now represented her journey continuing, her dreams still intact despite Karen Miller's attempt to derail them. They approached the gate together, where Rodriguez greeted them with genuine warmth. "Dr. Jackson, Miss Jackson, welcome to Flight 839. We're delighted to have you with us this evening." His tone held none of the obsequious panic that had characterized the airline staff earlier, just professional courtesy and authentic respect. Diana presented their passports and boarding passes, watching carefully as Rodriguez handled the documents with meticulous care, keeping them in full view at all times. The contrast with Karen's behavior was stark and deliberate. "Everything is in perfect order," Rodriguez confirmed, returning their documents with both hands. "We've assigned you to Suite 2A and 2B in our first-class cabin. Our lead flight attendant, Maria Gonzalez, will personally assist you with anything you need during the flight." As they walked down the jet bridge, Zoe felt a symbolic weight lifting. She was leaving behind not just the physical space where she'd been discriminated against, but also the momentary doubt that had crept in during those terrible minutes, the insidious question of whether she truly belonged in international spaces of academic excellence. On board, the first-class cabin was a serene sanctuary of soft lighting and spacious private suites. Lead flight attendant Gonzalez greeted them at the door with warm professionalism. "Dr. Jackson, Ms. Jackson, welcome aboard. May I show you to your suites?" The luxury accommodations were a stark contrast to the economy seat Zoe had originally been assigned. Each suite featured a wide leather seat that converted to a fully flat bed, a large personal entertainment screen, and a sliding door for complete privacy. "Would you care for a pre-departure beverage?" Gonzalez offered once they were settled. "We have champagne, orange juice, or water." "Orange juice would be nice," Zoe replied, still somewhat overwhelmed by the setting. As Gonzalez stepped away, Zoe turned to her mother. "This is a lot." Diana smiled slightly. "Yes, it is. But try to enjoy it. Zoe, sometimes justice comes in unexpected forms." Captain James Wilson's voice came over the intercom. warm and reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Welcome aboard Atlantic Global Flight 839 to London Heathrow. Our flight time tonight will be approximately 7 hours and 15 minutes, and we're expecting smooth conditions for most of our journey." He continued with the standard announcements, but there was nothing standard about the attention being paid to this particular flight. In the cockpit, Wilson and his crew had been briefed about their VIP passengers and the circumstances of their presence. The entire flight crew understood the importance of providing flawless service tonight. As the massive Boeing 777 pushed back from Gate B18, Zoe looked out the window at the sprawling lights of JFK Airport. Somewhere in that complex was Gate B42, where Karen Miller had tried to crush her dreams with a casual act of cruelty. Yet here she was, not only continuing her journey, but doing so with her mother by her side in the validation of seeing real consequences unfold. The aircraft taxied smoothly toward the runway, its powerful engines humming with contained energy. As they accelerated down the runway and lifted into the night sky, Zoe felt a profound sense of triumph. She was flying away from discrimination and toward opportunity, exactly as she had planned. Despite those who had tried to stand in her way, her passport, slightly coffee-stained but fully valid, rested securely in her bag, a tangible reminder that attempts to deny her identity and her right to travel had ultimately failed. As the aircraft reached cruising altitude, Diana Jackson gazed out the window at the tapestry of lights below, gradually giving way to the darkness of the Atlantic. The events of the day played through her mind: the frantic phone call from Zoe, the immediate deployment of her federal authority, the rush to the airport, and the confrontation with airline executives. Now, in the quiet sanctuary of the first-class cabin, she could finally process it all. Diana had spent her career navigating the complex, often hostile landscape of federal aviation. As one of the highest-ranking Black women in the FAA, she had faced her share of skepticism, microaggressions, and outright discrimination. She had learned to be strategic, to choose her battles carefully, to advance her agenda with precision rather than emotion. But today had been different. When Zoe called, something primal had overridden her carefully cultivated professional restraint. She had unleashed the full weight of her federal authority without hesitation, grounding an international flight and triggering multiple agency investigations. It was the most dramatic use of her power in 23 years of government service. Had she overreacted? The question lingered briefly before she dismissed it. No. Her response had been proportional to the offense, not just against her daughter, but against the integrity of the system she was sworn to oversee. Document security was a cornerstone of aviation safety. What Karen Miller had done wasn't just racist. It was a fundamental breach of protocols designed to protect everyone's safety. Diana looked over at Zoe, now asleep in her suite. Her daughter's face in repose showed no trace of the distress she had experienced hours earlier. Diana felt a surge of fierce pride. Zoe had handled the situation with remarkable composure, calling for help when needed but maintaining her dignity throughout. That resilience would serve her well at Cambridge and beyond. The incident had also crystallized something Diana had been considering for months. As deputy director, she had the authority to initiate system-wide reviews and implement new directives. The statistical pattern of discrimination they had uncovered at Atlantic Global was unlikely to be unique to that airline. This pointed to a need for broader reform. She opened her tablet, creating a new document titled Fair Air Travel Initiative. In it, she began outlining a comprehensive approach to addressing bias in passenger processing, mandatory bias training for all gate agents and customer-facing airline staff, statistical monitoring of document verification patterns across airlines, enhanced transparency in boarding procedures, with clear documentation requirements posted, independent review mechanisms for passenger complaints, regular audits of airline compliance with non-discrimination policies. This wouldn't be a punitive measure targeting Atlantic Global alone, but a systemic reform that would raise standards across the industry. If implemented properly, it could transform the travel experience for millions of passengers who had silently endured discrimination for decades. A flight attendant approached quietly, noting that Diana was still awake. "Can I get you anything, Dr. Jackson? Perhaps some tea or water?" "Tea would be lovely, thank you," Diana replied. As the attendant moved away, Diana reflected on how her own travel experiences had changed over the years. As a young Black woman traveling alone, she had faced the same suspicious scrutiny that Zoe encountered today. Now, with her federal credentials and executive status, she moved through airports with relative ease. But privilege shouldn't be required for dignity. The fundamental unfairness of it all strengthened her resolve. This incident with Zoe would become a catalyst for meaningful change, not just a personal victory, but a structural reform that would benefit countless travelers who lacked the power to ground planes when mistreated. Diana turned her attention back to her tablet, adding details to her initiative. By the time they landed in London, she would have a framework ready to share with her staff in Washington. The regulatory mechanisms were already in place. What had been missing was the political will to enforce them rigorously. She thought of Karen Miller, whose casual cruelty had set these events in motion. There was no satisfaction in knowing that one woman's career was destroyed, only a grim recognition that consequences were necessary for change. The real victory wouldn't be punishing a single gate agent, but transforming the system that had enabled her behavior for years. As the plane cruised eastward through the night, Diana felt the unique clarity that sometimes comes at 37,000 feet, a perspective that allows both distance from immediate concerns and insight into larger patterns. Today's incident was not isolated. It was part of a continuum of discrimination that persisted throughout American transportation systems, from Rosa Parks' bus to Zoe's airport gate. And just as those earlier moments had sparked movements for change, Diana was determined that this one would too, not through marches or protests, but through the methodical application of federal oversight, changing the rules of air travel to ensure that no one else's daughter would have her passport thrown away because of the color of her skin. The gentle bump of landing gear touching down at Heathrow Airport roused Zoe from sleep. Through her window, she could see the first hints of dawn illuminating the English countryside, a landscape she had previously known only through books and movies, now spread out before her in reality. "Good morning," Diana said softly from the adjacent suite. "Welcome to London." Zoe blinked away the remnants of sleep, memories of the previous day's events flooding back. It seemed surreal now. The confrontation with Karen, the passport in the trash, the grounded plane, all of it happening just hours ago on another continent. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London Heathrow Airport," the captain's voice announced over the intercom. "Local time is 6:42 a.m., and the temperature is a pleasant 18 degrees Celsius, or 64 degrees Fahrenheit. On behalf of Atlantic Global Airlines, I'd like to thank you for flying with us today." As the aircraft taxied toward the terminal, flight attendant Gonzalez approached their suites. "Dr. Jackson, Ms. Jackson, we have arranged for priority deplaning for you. Our London station manager, Mr. James Harrison, will meet you at the gate to assist with your arrival and connections." Diana nodded appreciatively. "Thank you, Miss Gonzalez. You and your team provided excellent service." The aircraft docked smoothly at the gate, and true to Gonzalez's word, Zoe and Diana were invited to deplane first. As they stepped into the jet bridge, Zoe felt the significance of the moment, her first steps on foreign soil, the beginning of her international academic journey, a dream realized despite attempts to derail it. At the gate, a tall man in an impeccable suit waited with a warm, professional smile. "Dr. Jackson, Mrs. Jackson, welcome to London. I'm James Harrison, Atlantic Global's London station manager." He extended his hand, which they both shook. "We've arranged for expedited immigration processing in assistance with your ground transportation to Cambridge." The special treatment continued as they were escorted through Heathrow's sprawling Terminal 5. A dedicated immigration officer reviewed their passports, Zoe still bearing faint coffee stains from its time in the JFK trash bin, and welcomed them to the United Kingdom with professional courtesy. Their luggage appeared promptly on a priority carousel, and a porter materialized to assist with the bags. Throughout the process, Harrison remained attentive without being obsequious, clearly briefed on the significance of these particular passengers, but maintaining a dignity that Zoe appreciated. "I've arranged for a private car to take you to your hotel," Harrison explained as they approached the arrivals hall. "I understand you'll be staying in London tonight before continuing to Cambridge tomorrow." "That's correct," Diana confirmed. "We thought it best to have a day to recover from the journey before Zoe begins her orientation." As they entered the arrivals area, Zoe was struck by the bustling international atmosphere, the cacophony of languages, the diverse faces, the sense of being truly in a global crossroads. This was what she had been looking forward to, expanding her horizons beyond the familiar boundaries of her life in Maryland. Outside the terminal, A sleek black Mercedes waited with a driver holding a discreet sign reading Jackson. Their luggage was carefully loaded, and soon they were gliding through the London morning traffic toward the city center. "It doesn't seem real," Zoe said, watching the unfamiliar landscape pass by. "After everything that happened yesterday, I half expected something else to go wrong." Diana smiled, reaching over to squeeze her daughter's hand. "You made it, despite Karen Miller's best efforts to stop you." The car turned onto the M4 motorway, joining the stream of morning commuters heading into central London. As iconic landmarks began to appear in the distance, Zoe felt a surge of emotion, gratitude, relief, excitement, all mingled together. "I'm glad you're here with me," she said to her mother. "I know it wasn't planned this way, but some good came from yesterday's ugliness." Diana finished for her. "I wouldn't have missed this moment for anything." Their hotel, an elegant establishment near Hyde Park, welcomed them with quiet efficiency. Their suite was ready despite the early hour, another courtesy arranged by Atlantic Global, and featured sweeping views of the London skyline. As they settled in, Zoe moved to the window, taking in the panorama of the city she had long dreamed of visiting. The journey that had nearly been derailed at JFK was now complete. Tomorrow, she would continue to Cambridge and begin her summer at one of the world's most prestigious universities. But today was for recovery, for processing, for the precious gift of time with her mother in a beautiful new city. "What would you like to do today?" Diana asked, joining her at the window. Zoe thought for a moment, then smiled. "Let's just explore. No agenda, no schedule, just us discovering London together." Diana nodded, understanding the deeper significance. After a day defined by discrimination and institutional responses, they both needed the freedom to simply exist, to enjoy each other's company in a new place, mother and daughter, travelers on their own terms, reclaiming the joy that Karen Miller had tried to steal. 1 week after the incident at JFK, the legal machinery was in full motion on multiple fronts. In the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York, Assistant U.S. Attorney Sophia Diaz convened a meeting with her prosecution team and FBI Special Agent Coleman to finalize their approach to the case. "We've completed our review of the evidence," Diaz announced, spreading files across the conference table. "Based on our findings, we're proceeding with charges against Karen Miller under 3 federal statutes." She tapped the first file. "Count 1, willful destruction of a passport in violation of 18 U.S.C. 1543. While the passport wasn't completely destroyed, the statute covers willful and knowing use in any manner that violates the law's purpose." Coleman nodded in agreement. "The intent is clear from the video. She deliberately placed the passport in trash to prevent international travel." "Count 2 by," Diaz continued, "interference with security screening personnel under 49 U.S.C. 46503 by deliberately mishandling federally approved identification documents at a security checkpoint. Miller interfered with the proper screening process." She opened the third file. "And count 3, deprivation of rights under color of authority. 18 U.S.C. 242. This is the civil rights charge, alleging that Miller, acting with the appearance of official authority, willfully subjected Jackson to the deprivation of rights secured by the Constitution, specifically her right to equal protection under the law." The assembled prosecutors reviewed the charging documents, adding notes and suggestions. The case was solid: multiple video angles, witness statements, statistical evidence of a pattern of discrimination, and Miller's own inconsistent statements during questioning all supported the charges. "What's Miller's legal status now?" asked junior attorney Mark Wilson. "She's retained counsel, Alan Bernstein from the firm of Bernstein and Goldman," Coleman replied. "He's reached out to discuss potential plea options." Diaz raised an eyebrow. "Already looking to plea? That's telling. The evidence is overwhelming," Coleman noted. "Bernstein is experienced enough to know when a trial would be counterproductive." Meanwhile, across town in the offices of the Department of Transportation's Civil Rights Division, a separate but parallel investigation was underway. Director Patricia Reynolds led a team reviewing Atlantic Global's compliance with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibited discrimination by recipients of federal funds, including airlines. "The statistical evidence is damning," Reynolds noted, reviewing the data analysis. Miller's pattern of subjecting passengers of color to enhanced scrutiny at 4.3 times the rate of white passengers far exceeds any reasonable security protocol. And the broader airline data isn't much better. Her deputy, James Wilson, highlighted sections of their preliminary report. We've identified disparities across multiple Atlantic global hubs. While not as extreme as Miller's personal pattern, the airline-wide data shows passengers of color receiving enhanced document scrutiny at approximately 2.7 times the rate of white passengers. This suggests a systemic issue, not just one rogue employee, Reynolds concluded. We're looking at potential airline-wide remediation requirements. The DOT investigation had broader implications than the criminal case against Miller. While the criminal prosecution focused on individual accountability, the civil rights investigation addressed the institutional conditions that enabled discriminatory behavior. At FBI headquarters in Washington, a specialized team was conducting a forensic analysis of Atlantic Global's complaint handling procedures. The results were troubling. We've identified a clear pattern in how discrimination complaints were processed, reported Special Agent Sandra Martinez. Complaints filed by passengers of color were categorized as customer service issues approximately 78% of the time, while similar complaints from white passengers were labeled service failures requiring management review. This classification difference meant that allegations of discrimination were routinely downgraded to minor customer dissatisfaction, effectively burying patterns that should have triggered intervention. The system was designed, perhaps unintentionally, to hide rather than highlight discrimination. Martinez concluded, by atomizing complaints into individual customer service tickets rather than tracking patterns, Atlantic Global effectively insulated itself from addressing systemic issues. In a downtown Manhattan law office, Karen Miller sat across from her attorney, Alan Bernstein, as he explained the gravity of her situation. The prosecution has a very strong case, Bernstein said gently but firmly. Multiple video angles, numerous witnesses, statistical evidence of a pattern of discriminatory behavior, and your own inconsistent statements during questioning. Karen stared at the table, her once confident demeanor now deflated by the reality of her situation. What am I looking at if we go to trial? Bernstein sighed. If convicted on all counts, the maximum exposure is significant, up to 25 years. That's the absolute worst case and highly unlikely for a first-time offender. But we're still talking about potential federal prison time. Karen's face went pale. Prison for throwing away a passport. For willfully depriving someone of their civil rights while acting under color of authority. Bernstein corrected. The federal government takes these violations very seriously, especially when there's clear evidence of discriminatory intent. He shuffled through his notes. The U.S. attorney has indicated a potential openness to discussing plea options. If we move quickly, before they file the formal indictment, we might secure better terms. What kind of terms? Karen asked, her voice barely above a whisper. If you plead guilty to a single count, likely the passport violation, they might drop the other charges. You'd still face potential prison time, but measured in months rather than years. Possibly even probation with significant community service requirements. Karen nodded numbly, the full consequences of her actions finally sinking in. In my career, Bernstein's expression was sympathetic but realistic. Your aviation career is over. Karen, no airline will hire you with this record. Any plea agreement will likely include industry debarment provisions prohibiting you from working in passenger transportation roles. As Karen confronted her new reality, the legal team at Atlantic Global Airlines was strategizing their response to the widening investigation. General Counsel Victoria Mendez addressed the executive committee with sobering clarity. Gentlemen, our exposure here goes well beyond the Karen Miller incident. The DOT's civil rights investigation has expanded to include our entire document verification process across all U.S. hubs. CEO Jonathan Reed looked troubled. How bad is it? Potentially very bad, Mendez replied frankly. They've identified statistical disparities that could be interpreted as evidence of systemic discrimination. While not as extreme as Miller's individual pattern, they're significant enough to trigger Title VI compliance reviews. And the penalties, Reed asked. For a company of our size, civil penalties could reach into the tens of millions. But the bigger threat is to our federal contracts and airport gate leases, which all contain non-discrimination clauses. We could lose access to key routes and facilities. The gravity of the situation settled over the executive committee. What had begun as one employee's discriminatory action had escalated into multiple federal investigations that threatened the airline's financial stability and operational capacity. Reed straightened his tie, a nervous habit when facing difficult decisions. Victoria, prepare a comprehensive settlement proposal. I want voluntary compliance measures, compensation funds, training programs, everything we need to get ahead of this. We can't afford to fight the federal government on this, not with the evidence they have. As the legal proceedings advanced on multiple fronts, one fact became increasingly clear. Karen Miller's decision to throw away Zoe Jackson's passport had set in motion a cascade of consequences that would transform not just her own life, but potentially the entire airline industry's approach to passenger equality. The corporate headquarters of Atlantic Global Airlines in Atlanta had been operating in crisis mode for 7 straight days. The executive floor, normally a bastion of corporate calm, now hummed with the frantic energy of damage control. Meeting rooms were filled around the clock, legal pads covered with strategy notes, whiteboards mapped out response scenarios, and tired executives sustained themselves on catered meals and too much coffee. In the main boardroom, CEO Jonathan Reed stood before his executive leadership team, his normally immaculate appearance showing signs of strain. His tie was slightly askew, and fatigue lines creased his face after a week of emergency meetings and sleepless nights. Ladies and gentlemen, today we implement our comprehensive response plan, he announced, gesturing to the presentation screen behind him. This isn't just about containing the fallout from the Jackson incident anymore. It's about fundamentally transforming how we operate. Chief Marketing Officer Andrea Lewis clicked to the first slide, displaying metrics that made several executives wince. Our brand damage assessment is grim. Consumer sentiment has dropped 47% in the week since the incident. Booking rates are down 23% across our network, with particularly sharp declines in markets with high minority populations, down almost 38% in Atlanta, Chicago, and New York. The slide changed to show social media metrics. The hashtag #PassportInTrash has been used over 3 million times. The original videos have accumulated more than 75 million views across platforms. Celebrity endorsers and influencers have publicly canceled partnerships with us, and 3 corporate clients have suspended their business travel contracts pending resolution of the DOT investigation. Reed nodded grimly. The financial impact is real and immediate. Now, Victoria, walk us through the legal response strategy. General Counsel Victoria Mendez rose, her expression serious. We've finalized our settlement approach with the Department of Transportation and the Department of Justice. Instead of fighting the allegations, we're proposing a comprehensive consent decree that goes beyond what they might demand. She clicked to the next slide, titled Proactive Compliance Initiative. And first, we're establishing a $25 million passenger compensation fund for verified incidents of discrimination over the past 5 years. Second, we're implementing comprehensive anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff, 20 hours initially, with quarterly refreshers. The executives listened intently as Mendez continued. Third, we're deploying a statistical monitoring system that will track document verification patterns across demographic groups, flagging any statistically significant disparities for immediate review. Chief Technology Officer James Park added, the system will use AI to analyze agent-passenger interactions, measuring factors like verification time, question patterns, and escalation rates. It's similar to technology used for quality control in call centers, but adapted for in-person interactions. Fourth, Mendez continued, we're creating an independent oversight board with representatives from civil rights organizations, academic experts, and customer advocates. They'll have full access to our compliance data and will issue public reports quarterly. CEO Reed stepped forward again. I want to emphasize that these measures aren't just about legal compliance or PR recovery. What happened to Zoe Jackson was inexcusable, and it exposed failures in our culture and systems that demand correction. We're going to lead the industry in creating an equitable travel experience, not because we're forced to, but because it's the right thing to do. He clicked to the next slide, which outlined the immediate operational changes. Starting today, we're implementing new document handling protocols across our entire network. All passport verification will be conducted in full view of passengers, with agents required to maintain the document within the passenger's sightline at all times. Any concerns about documentation must be referred to a supervisor. No individual agent will have authority to declare a document suspicious. Chief Operating Officer Robert Martinez added, "We've already deployed trainers to our major hubs. By the end of the week, every frontline employee will have completed initial briefings on the new procedures." Human Resources Director Patricia Wallace outlined the personnel aspects of the response. Beyond the termination of Karen Miller, we've placed 12 other customer service representatives with concerning complaint patterns on administrative leave pending review. We've also reorganized our complaint processing system to specifically flag and escalate discrimination concerns rather than burying them in general customer service metrics. Most importantly, Wallace continued, we're changing our hiring and promotion criteria to emphasize emotional intelligence and cultural competence alongside technical skills. We're implementing blind resum reviews to reduce unconscious bias in hiring and establishing diversity targets at all levels of the organization. The most dramatic announcement came from Reed himself. Finally, we're creating a new executive position, Chief Equality Officer. This person will report directly to me and will have veto power over any policy that could disparately impact customers based on race, gender, religion, or other protected characteristics. He paused, scanning the faces of his leadership team. I'm not going to pretend this transformation will be easy or comfortable. It will challenge assumptions that have been baked into our industry for decades. But the alternative, continuing with systems that enable discrimination, even if unintentional, is simply unacceptable. As the meeting concluded, the executives dispersed to implement their assigned aspects of the response plan. In the Public Relations Department, a team was finalizing the company's formal statement, which would be released as a full-page advertisement in major newspapers, a video message from the CEO, and a detailed plan on the airline's website. The statement acknowledged the failure in unequivocal terms. What happened to Zoe Jackson was wrong. It reflected both individual prejudice and systemic failures within our organization. We failed to protect her dignity, her rights, and her travel experience. For that, we are deeply sorry. But apologies alone are insufficient. Today, we announce comprehensive changes to ensure such incidents never occur again. Throughout the airline's network, gate agents were receiving new lanyards with a simple reminder card attached, document handling protocol visible, respectful, consistent. Training sessions were being conducted during shift changes, emphasizing that equal treatment wasn't just a legal requirement but a core value. In Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, Atlantic Global's largest hub, newly installed signs at each gate displayed the airline's passenger commitment in clear terms. Your documents will be handled with care and respect. Your identity will be verified with consistency and courtesy. Your dignity is our priority. The airline that had inadvertently become the face of travel discrimination was now investing millions to transform itself into an industry leader in equitable treatment, all because one employee had decided a young Black passenger didn't deserve to travel, and that employee had chosen the daughter of the wrong federal official to discriminate against. The ripple effects of the passport and trash incident spread far beyond Atlantic Global Airlines, sending shockwaves throughout the aviation industry and beyond. 3 weeks after the incident, representatives from 17 major U.S. airlines gathered in Washington, D.C. for an emergency summit convened by the Department of Transportation. The Renaissance Hotel ballroom had been transformed into a conference center, with airline executives seated at tables arranged in a large U-shape. At the center table sat Transportation Secretary Maria Gonzalez, flanked by her senior staff and Dr. Diana Jackson, whose dual role as both FAA Deputy Director and mother of the affected passenger gave her unique moral authority in the room. This summit was called because what happened to Zoe Jackson was not an isolated incident, Secretary Gonzalez began, her voice carrying through the hushed room. It was merely the most visible example of a problem that has persisted throughout our transportation systems for decades. She gestured to a screen showing statistics compiled by the DOT's Civil Rights Division. Our preliminary investigation has identified concerning patterns across multiple carriers. Passengers of color face enhanced document scrutiny at rates 4 to 3.7 times higher than white passengers. Complaint rates regarding customer service treatment show similar disparities. The airline representatives shifted uncomfortably. Many had come prepared to distance themselves from Atlantic Global's troubles, but the data suggested the problem was industry-wide. Let me be clear, Secretary Gonzalez continued. The Department of Transportation views these disparities as potential violations of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination by recipients of federal funds, which includes every airline represented in this room. Jackson then took the floor, carefully balancing her professional and personal perspectives. As federal regulators, we could simply launch investigations into each of your airlines, similar to what Atlantic Global is currently experiencing. That would be our right, and perhaps our obligation. She paused, scanning the faces of the assembled executives. But we're offering an alternative approach. Today, we're introducing the Fair Air Travel Initiative, a comprehensive framework for voluntary compliance that would transform how airlines handle passenger documentation and process potential security concerns. As Jackson outlined the initiative, it became clear that this wasn't merely a reactive measure to a single incident, but a carefully crafted reform package that had likely been in development for some time, with the JFK incident providing the political momentum to launch it. The core elements included standardized document handling protocols across all airlines, mandatory bias training for gate agents and security personnel, statistical monitoring of verification patterns with regular audits, independent oversight mechanisms for passenger complaints, enhanced transparency in boarding procedures. Airlines that voluntarily adopt these standards and demonstrate compliance will receive a certification as Fair Air Travel Partners. Jackson explained, those that don't may face enhanced scrutiny under our existing regulatory authority. The implied threat was clear. Get on board voluntarily or face potential enforcement actions. Delta Airlines CEO Michael Simmons was the first to respond. Dr. Jackson, Secretary Gonzalez, Delta is prepared to commit to these standards immediately. In fact, we began implementing similar measures internally the day after the Atlantic Global incident. United, American, and Southwest quickly followed suit. By the end of the summit, 15 of the 17 airlines had pledged to adopt the Fair Air Travel Standards, with only 2 smaller carriers requesting additional time to review the requirements. Beyond the airlines themselves, the incident triggered responses throughout adjacent industries and government agencies. At the Transportation Security Administration headquarters, Administrator James Thompson convened his senior staff to address potential biases in their screening procedures. We're not immune to these issues, Thompson acknowledged. Our own data shows disparities in secondary screening rates that can't be explained by risk factors alone. The TSA launched a comprehensive review of its passenger screening algorithms and officer training programs. Within weeks, they announced revised protocols designed to reduce subjective decision-making in the selection of passengers for enhanced screening. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency undertook a similar internal review, focusing on entry procedures at international airports. Their analysis revealed concerning patterns in secondary inspection rates and questioning intensity based on travelers' national origins and racial backgrounds. We cannot effectively secure our borders if our procedures undermine public trust, CBP Commissioner Elena Rodriguez stated in a press release announcing reforms to the agency's traveler processing protocols. In Congress, the incident catalyzed legislative action that had previously stalled. Representative James Williams, chair of the House Transportation Committee, introduced the Air Travelers' Rights Act, which would codify many of the DOT's voluntary standards into federal law. What happened to Zoe Jackson was a wake-up call, Williams stated during a press conference announcing the legislation. But we know from the data that thousands of travelers experience similar discrimination every day, even if their stories don't go viral. The bill gained bipartisan support, with even traditionally regulation-averse lawmakers recognizing the political liability of opposing protections against such visible discrimination. Civil rights organizations seized the momentum to advance broader transportation equity initiatives. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund launched a Travel While Black campaign, creating a mobile app that allowed travelers to report and document discriminatory treatment across all modes of transportation. The Jackson incident demonstrated the power of documentation, explained LDF President Marcus Washington. Our app gives every traveler the tools. Retry PD Continue 25. Broader industry impact continued. The Jackson incident demonstrated the power of documentation, explained LDF President Marcus Washington. Our app gives every traveler the tools to record and report discrimination, creating a database that can drive systemic change. In the technology sector, Startups developed innovative solutions for document verification that could reduce human bias. Clearance AI introduced a system that used computer vision to verify travel documents, with identical processing times regardless of passenger demographics. Major airports began reviewing their own oversight of airline operations. Chicago's Department of Aviation announced enhanced monitoring of gate operations at O'Hare and Midway, including regular audits of document handling procedures. Even travel insurance companies responded, with industry leader TravelGuard introducing a new policy rider that covered expenses resulting from discriminatory treatment, including costs of rebooking, accommodation, and legal assistance. Media coverage of these industry-wide changes kept the conversation alive long after the initial incident might have faded from public attention. Travel journalists produced in-depth features examining discrimination in various aspects of the travel experience, from car rentals to hotel check-ins to airport retail interactions. Travel Plus Leisure magazine dedicated an entire issue to Equality in Motion, featuring first-person accounts from travelers of color alongside interviews with industry leaders about reform efforts. The passport in trash incident had become more than a viral moment or a single airline's crisis. It had evolved into a catalyst for examining deeply entrenched patterns of discrimination throughout the travel ecosystem. What Karen Miller had intended as an act of casual cruelty toward one teenager had inadvertently triggered a national reckoning that would reshape the travel experience for millions of passengers. And at the center of it all was Dr. Diana Jackson, skillfully leveraging both her professional authority and her personal experience as a mother to drive change that might otherwise have taken decades to achieve. The ancient stones of Cambridge University glowed golden in the late afternoon sunlight as Zoe made her way across the courtyard of Trinity College. 2 weeks into the Summer Institute for Future Engineers, she had settled into a routine that balanced intensive academic work with the unique experience of studying at one of the world's oldest and most prestigious universities. The Gothic architecture, with its soaring spires and intricate stonework, provided a stark contrast to the cutting-edge engineering concepts she was absorbing in daily lectures and laboratories. It was this blend of tradition and innovation that made the program so special, and that made her all the more grateful that Karen Miller's attempt to derail her journey had failed. "Zoe, wait up," called a voice behind her. Turning, she saw Aisha Patel, a brilliant mathematics student from Mumbai, who had become one of her closest friends in the program. "Heading to Dr. Harrington's lecture?" Aisha asked, falling into step beside her. "Yes, and I still haven't finished the pre-reading," Zoe admitted with a small smile. "Fluid dynamics is kicking my butt this week." As they walked together toward the engineering building, Zoe reflected on how quickly she had bonded with the other students in the program. The 30 participants came from 17 different countries, each bringing unique perspectives and experiences to their collaborative projects. Their shared passion for engineering created an immediate connection that transcended cultural and linguistic differences. Dr. William Harrington, their primary instructor, had been incredibly supportive after learning about the incident at JFK. He had arranged for Zoe to receive the orientation materials she had missed and had checked in with her regularly to ensure she was adjusting well. "You know," he had told her during their first one-on-one meeting, "what happened to you at that airport is unfortunately part of a long historical pattern. Some of the greatest scientific minds of the 20th century faced similar barriers when trying to travel for their work, especially those who were people of color." He had shared stories of other scientists and engineers who had overcome discrimination to make groundbreaking contributions to their fields. Those conversations had helped Zoe contextualize her experience within a broader historical framework, transforming it from a personal trauma into part of a continuum of challenges that talented minorities had faced and overcome. Inside the lecture hall, Zoe and Aisha found seats near the front. As she arranged her notebook and tablet, Zoe noticed a new message from her mother, just finished testifying before the House Transportation Committee. The Air Travelers' Rights Act passed out of committee with bipartisan support. "So proud of how your experience is creating positive change. Love you and can't wait to hear about your fluid dynamics project. Call when you can." Zoe smiled, feeling a complex mix of emotions. The incident still sometimes surfaced in her dreams, the humiliation of watching her passport disappear into the trash, the helplessness she had momentarily felt. But those feelings were increasingly overshadowed by pride in how her mother had transformed that moment of injustice into meaningful reform. Dusty Harrington began his lecture on computational fluid dynamics, and Zoe immersed herself in the complex mathematics that would help her design more efficient aircraft propulsion systems, her particular area of interest within the program. For the next 90 minutes, passport incidents and aviation regulations faded completely from her mind, replaced by the elegant equations that described how air and liquids move through engineered systems. After the lecture, the students gathered in small project groups. Zoe's team included Aisha, Carlos from Brazil, and Thomas from Germany. They had been assigned to design a microscale fluid dynamics system that could potentially be used in medical devices. I was thinking about using biomimicry principles, Zoe suggested, sketching a quick design inspired by the circulatory system of a leaf. Nature has already solved most efficient flow problems. Her teammates built on the idea, each contributing their specialty: Aisha's mathematical models, Carlos's material science knowledge, Thomas's expertise in miniaturization. Their collaboration flowed effortlessly, ideas building upon ideas without regard for national origin or background. Later, as Zoe walked back to her college residence in the gathering dusk, she felt a profound sense of belonging. Here, in this ancient institution of learning, she was valued for her mind, for her ideas, her creativity, her analytical skills. Her contributions to discussions and projects were judged purely on their merit, not filtered through preconceptions about who she was or where she came from. This was the experience Karen Miller had tried to deny her. This was what her mother had fought to protect. And this was what motivated both Jackson women to work toward a world where no one's potential would be limited by others' prejudice, a world where passports would be handled with care and respect, and dreams would be enabled rather than discarded. The United States District Court for the Eastern District of New York projected an atmosphere of solemn authority. Polished wood paneling lined the walls. The seal of the federal judiciary hung prominently behind the judge's bench, and the American flag stood as a silent sentinel to the proceedings about to unfold. Karen Miller sat at the defendant's table beside her attorney, Alan Bernstein. Gone were her Atlantic Global uniform and the confident demeanor that had once characterized her interactions with passengers. Today she wore a conservative navy blue suit that seemed slightly too large for her diminished frame, and her face betrayed the stress of the 3-month legal ordeal that had culminated in this moment. At the prosecution table, Assistant U.S. Attorney Sophia Diaz reviewed her notes one final time. After weeks of negotiations, Miller had agreed to plead guilty to one count of willful misuse of a passport under 18 U.S.C. 1543 in exchange for the government dropping the other charges. Today was her sentencing hearing. The gallery was filled with observers, journalists, legal students, airline representatives, and civil rights advocates all gathered to witness the resolution of a case that had captured national attention. In the front row sat Zoe Jackson, who had returned from Cambridge for this hearing, and her mother, Diana Jackson. Their presence was both personal and symbolic, representatives of the individual harm caused by Miller's actions and the systemic changes that had resulted from it. "All rise," called the bailiff as Judge Michael Rodriguez entered the courtroom. The United States District Court for the Eastern District of New York is now in session. The Honorable Judge Michael Rodriguez presiding. After the preliminary formalities, Judge Rodriguez addressed the matter at hand. "We are here for sentencing in the case of United States v. Miller. The defendant has pleaded guilty to one count of willful misuse of a passport in violation of federal law." He turned his attention to Miller. "Miss Miller, before I pronounce sentence, you have the right to address the court. Do you wish to make a statement?" Karen Miller rose slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the table for support. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible at first, gaining strength as she continued. "Your Honor, I stand before you today fully accepting responsibility for my actions. What I did was wrong, inexcusably wrong. I violated Miss Jackson's rights, abused my position of authority, and acted out of bias that I didn't even recognize in myself until it was too late." Miller paused, struggling to maintain her composure. "I've had 3 months to reflect on what led me to that moment, the prejudices I had internalized over decades, the false sense of power I derived from controlling who could and couldn't travel. I see now how I measured passengers against invisible standards that had nothing to do with security and everything to do with my own biases." She turned slightly toward where Zoe and Diana sat. "Miss Jackson, Jackson, I know words cannot undo the harm I caused, but I am deeply, truly sorry for what I did that day and for the pattern of discrimination that preceded it. You deserve dignity and respect. Instead, I tried to rob you of your opportunity and your dreams out of nothing but prejudice. Judge Rodriguez nodded. Thank you, Ms. Miller, Ms. Diaz. Does the government wish to make a statement regarding sentencing? Assistant U.S. Attorney Diaz rose. Yes, Your Honor. The government acknowledges Ms. Miller's guilty plea and her acceptance of responsibility. However, we must emphasize the severity of this offense. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. The evidence revealed a years-long pattern of discriminatory behavior that culminated in a deliberate attempt to prevent a young woman from traveling internationally by disposing of her federal identification. Diaz referenced documents from her table. The investigation uncovered 23 prior complaints against Mrs. Miller, predominantly from passengers of color. Statistical analysis demonstrated that she subjected non-white passengers to enhanced scrutiny at 3 times the rate of white passengers. This suggests deeply ingrained bias that manifested in systematic discrimination. She continued, the government recognizes that Ms. Miller has no prior criminal history and has cooperated since her guilty plea. Taking all factors into consideration, we recommend a sentence of 8 months incarceration followed by 2 years of supervised release, along with 500 hours of community service specifically focused on civil rights education. Judge Rodriguez then turned to Bernstein. Counsel for the defense, your recommendation. Bernstein stood. Your Honor, we respectfully request that the court consider a non-custodial sentence. Ms. Miller has already suffered significant consequences. The loss of her career of 17 years, public humiliation, and financial devastation. She has begun intensive counseling to address the biases that led to her actions and has voluntarily enrolled in civil rights education programs. He continued, we propose instead a 3-year probationary period, 1,000 hours of community service in diverse communities, and mandatory completion of anti-bias training programs. This would allow Ms. Miller to make meaningful amends while continuing her journey toward understanding and addressing the prejudices that led to this incident. Judge Rodriguez considered both recommendations thoughtfully. Does Ms. Jackson wish to make a victim impact statement? Zoe looked to her mother, who nodded encouragingly. Taking a deep breath, Zoe rose and approached the podium. Your Honor, 3 months ago, I was excited to begin my journey to Cambridge University's engineering program. Instead, I found myself watching my passport, my identity, my opportunity, my dreams, being thrown into the trash by someone who decided I didn't deserve to travel based on how I looked. Her voice was steady, her words carefully chosen. In that moment, I felt many things: shock, humiliation, fear. But what I remember most was the injustice of it all. I had done everything right. I had earned my place in that program. I had followed every rule. And still, Ms. Miller decided I didn't belong. Zoe paused, gathering her thoughts. I'm not here seeking vengeance. What happened to me wasn't unique. It was just uniquely visible because my mother had the authority to demand accountability. Many travelers face similar discrimination every day without the power to address it. She looked directly at Karen. What I want is for this case to create lasting change. I want gate agents to think twice before making assumptions about who belongs where. I want airlines to recognize that equal treatment isn't just a legal requirement, but a moral obligation. And I want other young people who look like me to travel without fear of being humiliated or denied their opportunities. As Zoe returned to her seat, Judge Rodriguez thanked her for her statement. After a moment of deliberation, he delivered his decision. Ms. Miller, after considering all factors in this case, the nature and circumstances of the offense, your history and characteristics, the need for the sentence to reflect the seriousness of the offense, and the goal of promoting respect for the law, I am sentencing you to 6 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Miller's shoulders slumped slightly at the mention of incarceration. Additionally, the judge continued, you will complete 800 hours of community service with organizations that promote civil rights and cross-cultural understanding. You will participate in comprehensive anti-bias training, and you will be permanently barred from employment in transportation security positions. Judge Rodriguez leaned forward, his expression grave but not unsympathetic. Ms. Miller, your actions that day reflected a failure to recognize the fundamental dignity of another human being. The purpose of this sentence is not merely punishment, but rehabilitation and deterrence, to ensure that neither you nor others in positions of authority make similar choices in the future. He concluded, the court also recognizes the broader implications of this case. What happened at JFK that day has already catalyzed significant reforms in airline procedures and federal oversight. While those changes cannot erase Ms. Zoe Jackson's experience, they represent a positive outcome from an unfortunate incident. As the bailiff led Karen Miller away to begin processing her sentence, Diana put her arm around Zoe's shoulders. The legal proceedings had reached their conclusion, but both women knew that the true impact of that day at JFK would continue to unfold in policy changes, institutional reforms, and a gradual shift toward more equitable treatment in air travel. The grand hearing room of the Rayburn House office building hummed with anticipation. Members of the House Transportation Committee settled into their seats on the raised dais. Aides whispered last-minute briefings into their ears, and spectators filled the public gallery. Camera crews from major networks positioned themselves strategically, preparing to broadcast the proceedings live. At the witness table sat Dr. Diana Jackson, her professional demeanor impeccable in a tailored Navy suit, a folder of prepared testimony before her. Today marked the culmination of a year's work. The final hearing before the committee voted on the Air Travelers' Rights Act, legislation that would codify the Fair Air Travel Initiative into federal law. Committee Chairman Representative James Williams gavelled the session to order. This hearing of the House Transportation Committee is now in session. Today we consider H.R. 4723, the Air Travelers' Rights Act, which would establish uniform standards for document handling procedures, require anti-bias training for transportation personnel, and create oversight mechanisms to prevent discriminatory treatment in our nation's airports and airlines. He looked toward Diana. Our primary witness today is Dr. Diana Jackson, Deputy Director for Air Traffic Safety Oversight at the Federal Aviation Administration and the architect of the Fair Air Travel Initiative. Dr. Jackson, you may proceed with your testimony. Diana adjusted the microphone and began. Thank you, Chairman Williams and distinguished members of the committee. 1 year ago, my 17-year-old daughter, Zoe, approached the gate for her flight to London, where she was to attend Cambridge University's engineering program. Instead of being processed like other passengers, she watched as a gate agent deliberately threw her passport into a trash receptacle, an act of discrimination captured on video and witnessed by dozens. The room was silent as Diana continued. That incident, painful as it was for my daughter, exposed systemic problems that affect thousands of travelers daily. In the years since, the voluntary standards implemented through the Fair Air Travel Initiative have demonstrated that equitable treatment is not just a moral imperative, but an achievable reality. She presented the committee with data collected over the past 12 months. Participating airlines have reported a 93% reduction in discrimination complaints. Document verification times have been standardized across demographic groups. Passenger satisfaction scores have increased by an average of 27%. Diana clicked to the next slide in her presentation. But voluntary compliance, while promising, is insufficient. Without the force of law, these standards remain optional and potentially temporary. The Air Travelers' Rights Act would ensure that all passengers, regardless of race, religion, national origin, or appearance, receive equal treatment in our transportation systems. As questions from committee members followed, it became clear that the legislation had broad bipartisan support. Even traditionally regulation-averse representatives acknowledged the compelling evidence and the reasonable, measured approach of the proposed standards. Meanwhile, across the country, at MIT's campus in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Zoe Jackson was in her freshman year, thriving in the aerospace engineering program. The lecture hall filled with students as Professor Helen Chen prepared to begin her class on advanced propulsion systems. Before we dive into today's material, Professor Chen announced, I want to acknowledge a significant contribution from one of our own students. Zoe Jackson has been working with the Transportation Security Administration to develop an algorithm that standardizes document verification procedures while maintaining security integrity. Zoe felt her classmates' eyes turn toward her with newfound respect. The project had grown out of her experience at JFK, transforming personal trauma into practical innovation. Using principles from her engineering studies, She had helped design a system that removes subjective human judgment from initial document verification, a technical solution to a human problem. After class, her project partner, Michael Rodriguez, caught up with her. "Did you see the news your mom's testifying before Congress today on the Air Travelers' Rights Act?" Zoe nodded, checking her phone. "The vote's scheduled for tomorrow. All indications are it's going to pass." That's amazing," Michael said. "From one incident to federal legislation in a year, that's got to be some kind of record." "It wasn't just one incident," Zoe corrected him. "What happened to me was just the visible tip of a massive iceberg. The data my mom's team collected showed thousands of similar cases that never made headlines." At Atlantic Global's corporate headquarters in Atlanta, the transformation was equally evident. The airline that had become the reluctant face of travel discrimination had reinvented itself as an industry leader in equitable service. Their boardroom now displayed their equality metrics dashboard prominently, a real-time tracking system showing document verification times, complaint rates, and customer satisfaction scores broken down by demographic categories. CEO Jonathan Reed addressed the quarterly leadership meeting with confidence that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. "Our latest customer satisfaction scores show we've not only recovered from last year's crisis, but have actually strengthened our brand. By embracing reform rather than resisting it, we've turned a potential disaster into a competitive advantage." The statistics backed his assertion. After an initial booking decline following the incident, Atlantic Global had steadily rebuilt its customer base. Their industry-leading equality policies had attracted socially conscious travelers and corporate clients with diversity commitments, more than offsetting any losses. The Jackson protocols, as we now call our document handling procedures, have been adopted by airlines in 17 countries. Reed continued, "What began as our response to a crisis has become a global standard for equitable travel." In a federal prison in Pennsylvania, Karen Miller was 3 weeks away from completing her 6-month sentence. The time behind bars had been difficult but transformative. She had used the opportunity to reflect deeply on the biases that had defined her career and to educate herself through every available program. As part of her rehabilitation, she had written an article titled "From Gatekeeper to Gate Opener" for the prison's newsletter, examining how she had weaponized her authority against those she unconsciously deemed unworthy. The piece had been reprinted in several criminal justice publications and was now used in training materials for transportation security personnel as a first-person account of how bias can corrupt authority. Back in Washington, as Diana concluded her testimony, Representative Sarah Martinez asked the question many had been thinking, "Dr. Jackson, while the professional aspects of your work on this initiative are clear, may I ask a more personal question? How has your daughter Zoe been affected by both the incident and the reforms it sparked?" Diana smiled, maternal pride momentarily overtaking her professional demeanor. "Zoe is thriving at MIT. Congresswoman. She's taken her experience and channeled it into developing technical solutions to human problems. But beyond her personal achievement, she tells me what matters most to her is knowing that other young people won't face the barriers she encountered." She looked directly into the camera, knowing her daughter might be watching. "Zoe doesn't see herself as a victim, but as a catalyst. And in that transformation lies the true measure of justice, not just in consequences for past wrongs, but in creating systems that prevent future ones." As the hearing concluded, the vote scheduled for the following day seemed almost ceremonial. The Air Travelers' Rights Act would pass, transforming voluntary standards into federal law and ensuring that the discrimination Zoe had faced would become increasingly rare for future generations of travelers. 3 years after the incident at JFK, Karen Miller stood before a community center classroom in Philadelphia, her hands slightly trembling as she adjusted her notes on the podium. The room was filled with airline employees, transportation security officers, and customer service representatives attending a mandatory training session titled "Recognizing and Addressing Unconscious Bias in Transportation." "My name is Karen Miller," she began, her voice steadier than her hands. 3 years ago, I was an Atlantic Global Airlines gate agent with 17 years of experience. Today, I'm a convicted federal offender who served 6 months in prison for violating a young woman's civil rights." The audience shifted uncomfortably, but Karen continued with the rawness and honesty that had become her hallmark as a speaker. "I threw away a teenage girl's passport because she didn't look like what I thought a Cambridge University student should look like. I never used a racial slur or made an explicitly racist statement. I told myself I was just being thorough, just doing my job. And that's what makes unconscious bias so dangerous. It hides behind justifications and rationalizations that we convince ourselves are reasonable. She clicked to a slide showing statistics from her own case file. The investigation revealed that I subjected passengers of color to enhanced scrutiny at 4.3 times the rate of white passengers. Not because I considered myself racist, but because I had internalized a set of assumptions about who belonged in certain spaces and who deserved the benefit of the doubt. Karen's rehabilitation journey had been neither easy nor straightforward. After serving her sentence, she had struggled to find employment with a federal conviction on her record. The community service component of her sentence had connected her with civil rights organizations, where her firsthand experience with bias had eventually transformed into an unlikely asset. Now she worked as a consultant for the Department of Transportation's Civil Rights Division, using her story to help others recognize and address their own biases. My actions destroyed my career, damaged my financial security, and sent me to federal prison, she told the attentive audience. But they also caused real harm to Zoe Jackson, harm that no sentence could undo. The lesson isn't just don't discriminate because you might get caught. It's recognize that your unconscious biases can cause lasting damage to real people with real dreams. Meanwhile, at MIT's Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics, junior year student Zoe Jackson was making final adjustments to a pioneering system that had grown from her freshman year project. What had begun as a simple algorithm for standardizing document verification had evolved into Equipass, a comprehensive technology platform designed to remove subjective human judgment from initial travel document processing. The system uses computer vision to verify document authenticity with consistent parameters regardless of the traveler's appearance. Zoe explained to the visiting delegation from the Transportation Security Administration, it flags genuine security concerns based solely on objective criteria while eliminating the influence of individual biases. The technology had been piloted at 3 major airports with remarkable results. Verification times had been standardized across all demographic groups. False flags had decreased by 47%, and passenger satisfaction scores had increased significantly. Now the TSA was considering nationwide implementation. What makes Equipass different from previous security technologies is that it was designed specifically with equity as a core feature, not an afterthought. Zoe continued, her confidence as an engineer evident in every word. We built in continuous statistical monitoring that alerts administrators if any demographic disparities begin to emerge in processing outcomes. One of the TSA officials nodded appreciatively. Ms. Jackson, we've seen numerous security technologies over the years, but this is the first one that addresses both security needs and civil rights concerns with equal rigor. How did you come to this particular approach? Zoe smiled slightly. Let's just say I had a personal experience that highlighted the need for objective standards in document verification. In Washington, Dr. Diana Jackson sat in her new office at the Department of Transportation headquarters. The nameplate on her door read, Dr. Diana Jackson, Assistant Secretary for Aviation Consumer Protection, reflecting her promotion following the successful implementation of the Air Travelers' Rights Act. On her desk sat a framed photograph of herself and Zoe at Cambridge 3 years earlier, a reminder of both what had been at stake and what had been achieved. Beside it lay a report titled 3-Year Impact Assessment of the Air Travelers' Rights Act, which detailed the transformation across the aviation industry. Discrimination complaints had decreased by 87% across all UMs. Airlines' document verification times had been standardized across demographic groups. 100% of customer-facing airline staff had completed comprehensive anti-bias training. Independent oversight boards with civil rights representation were functioning at all major carriers. Technology solutions were increasingly removing subjective human judgment from initial security screening. Diana's phone rang. A call from Representative Williams, the primary sponsor of the legislation. Dr. Jackson, he greeted her warmly. I've just reviewed the 3-year impact report. The results are even better than we projected during the hearings. Yes, Congressman, the industry has embraced these changes more thoroughly than we anticipated. Diana replied, what began as a crisis response has evolved into a genuine commitment to equitable service. And it all started with that incident at JFK, Williams mused. Sometimes it takes a particularly visible injustice to catalyze systemic change. True, Diana agreed, though I'd prefer my daughter hadn't been the one to experience that particular injustice. How is Zoe doing with her MIT program, still developing that security technology? Thriving, Diana said with unmistakable maternal pride. Equipass is being considered for national implementation by the TSA. She's turned a traumatic experience into innovation that will help others. As Diana reflected on the journey of the past 3 years, she recognized that the incident at JFK had ultimately created positive change far beyond what she could have imagined in those first angry moments after Zoe's call. The discriminatory act that had threatened her daughter's dreams had instead launched reforms that would protect countless travelers for generations to come. The passport that Karen Miller had thrown away was long gone, but its legacy lived on in federal legislation, in technological innovation, in corporate practices, and in the consciousness of an industry transformed. That small document, meant to enable Zoe's journey, had indeed done so, not just her personal journey to Cambridge, but a much larger journey toward a more equitable travel experience for all. What had begun as an act of discrimination had become a catalyst for change, demonstrating that sometimes justice doesn't just mean consequences for wrongdoing, but transformation of the systems that allow such wrongs to occur. And in that transformation was the truest form of justice, not just for Zoe Jackson, but for every traveler who would benefit from the new standards her experience had inspired. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue to share powerful stories of justice and transformation that might otherwise go untold. Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination while traveling? Share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters, and your experiences could help others recognize and address bias in their own lives and institutions. Remember that documentation is power. In today's world, having the courage to record injustice, like Sophia did with her phone at JFK, can spark changes that affect millions. One person's stand for dignity can transform entire systems when we have the courage to bear witness and demand accountability. Share this video with someone who needs to understand how unconscious bias affects real lives, or with someone who might need to know they're not alone in their experiences. Together, we can build transportation systems and a society where everyone travels with dignity, respect, and equal treatment under the law.